So take the next few minutes and listen very closely. You'll be amazed at what you hear.
Every so often, a figure emerges from the miasma of Hollywood. The type of person who's unashamedly themselves, whose quirks and peculiarities become so recognizable that their very being is adopted into the pop culture lexicon. This is the type of person who can be decades outside of their peak of relevance and still be parodied in a Family Guy or SNL skit. William Shatner is one such figure, an actor with a penchant for grandiloquence and a healthy dose of self-aware arrogance. Shatner is Shatner.
What are you gonna do, kill me? Yes.
His defining characteristic is undoubtedly his line delivery. Having cut his teeth on classical Shakespearean theater, there's a unique affectation to his on-screen speech with frequent dramatic pauses like he's carefully considering what to say next.
And perhaps your intelligence wasn't so great, Sargon. We faced a similar crisis in our early nuclear age. We found the wisdom not to destroy ourselves.
It's been the subject of impressions and parodies for over half a century now. In spite of its enduring mimetic legacy, Captain Kirk, as portrayed by Shatner in the original Star Trek series, was one of those iconic TV performances. Spock may have been the fan favorite, but Kirk was a real badass.
Checkmate.
Not chess, Mr. Spock. Poker.
He just had this charisma that made him fun to watch. It's through Kirk and Star Trek's eventual syndication that Shatner would go on to become a major figure in American pop culture. This left the actor in a bit of a strange place. Star Trek was popular among a certain crowd. The Trekkie community was enthusiastic, but at the time of the show's original airing, it wasn't huge. So despite the prevalence of Star Trek, Shatner didn't become a big movie star, so to speak. Actors like Clint Eastwood and Steve McQueen would parlay their network TV popularity into big-time movie careers. That was the dream. Following Star Trek's cancellation, Shatner found no such opportunities, now living out of his truck and taking any job that would come his way. The roles he was given were sporadic appearances in TV shows, low-rent science fiction films, and commercials. So he did the smart thing and embraced the character of James T. Kirk. Whereas many self-serious actors would have been disgusted by the hordes of sweaty nerds waiting for autographs at a convention, Shatner probably was also disgusted, but he did it anyway.
Well, what do you think about the response that they gave you at that convention, 10,000 people, and the packed house here tonight?
I have...
The popularity of Star Trek grew in the years after its initial airing, and with the success of several sci-fi pictures in the late 70s, Paramount saw an opportunity. The original cast was reassembled, and Star Trek: The Motion Picture was released in 1979. It was successful enough to spawn sequel after sequel after sequel, each one finding tremendous success. The Star Trek movies set the stage for William Shatner's second act, the revitalization of his career. In 1982, he was given a role in the pilot episode of a police-themed TV show called The Protectors. The producers of the show found his performance so compelling that the premise was reworked, and the show was named after Shatner's character, T.J. Hooker. Shat plays the titular Hooker. There's a sentence for you. A hard-edged cop with a chip on his shoulder and a drive to clean up the streets. While the show was reasonably successful, enough to last for 5 seasons anyway, it hasn't exactly benefited from hindsight in the way that Star Trek has. These days, it's mainly notable for an early appearance of Jonathan Banks, who would go on to play Mike Ehrmantraut in Breaking Bad, a show that most people actually care about. If you like watching people run and enjoy seeing Shatner attempting to have normal interactions with others, then, it's not without its value.
You won't mind keeping your voice down and not calling me Junior and stuff like that.
No problem, Romano.
And if you give William Shatner a nightstick, something entertaining will happen eventually. That's just the law of nature taking place.
Get mine, Romano. There's only one way to keep your kind of scum off the streets.
The premise of the episodes gradually became more outrageous, while the writing for the most part was formulaic. The showrunners knew exactly what they wanted T.J. Hooker to be, and as a result, it was strictly okay even in its best moments. Now, the 1980s wasn't just the decade of T.J. Hooker, as evidenced by the fact that my mom didn't remember the show when I asked her about it, and she references Mr. Belvedere, okay? The 1980s was the decade where science fiction became cool again. Movies like The Terminator, RoboCop, and Aliens became cultural landmarks. With the release of works such as Ridley Scott's Blade Runner and William Gibson's debut novel, Neuromancer, the door was being opened to a whole new subgenre of science fiction, cyberpunk.
Cyberpunks are on the cutting edge of what tomorrow may bring. The cyberpunks are a group of youngsters who are into computers.
Yeah, okay. I guess that's an acceptable definition. A high-tech, neon-soaked vision of the future ruled by a corporate oligarchy plagued with crime and an erosion of social trust. Throughout the 1980s, many cyberpunk stories and games developed a cult-like audience. Toward the end of the decade, production was beginning on a fifth Star Trek movie when union truck drivers went on strike. This meant that production equipment couldn't be moved, which led to a standstill. With nothing to do but wait out negotiations, Shatner began to pen the concept for a sci-fi novel. They say write what you know, and that's exactly what he did. Inspired in part by cyberpunk media, the book, according to Shatner's autobiography, was conceived as, quote, T.J. Hooker meets the fugitive in a Star Trek future. TekWar was born. With the first book released in 1989, William Shatner's TekWar would go on to exist. The book imagined a future. Robots are there. Oh, and William Shatner's there. Okay, well actually no, he's not. But he did write it. Oh, okay. Apparently it was actually ghostwritten by Ron Goulart. There are robots though, that part was true. TekWar was not tech-warmly received by critics, but it was still popular enough to warrant sequels. By 1993, the TekWar novels had sold over 500,000 copies, which, relatively speaking, wasn't too shabby. There's no doubt that Shatner's involvement was a huge boon here, as Star Trek The Next Generation had begun airing in '87, leading to what was arguably the peak of Star Trek's popularity as a franchise. So, the book sold quite well. Then there was a TekWar comic book. Then there were TekWar trading cards. Then there was a bunch of TekWar movies. Then there was a TekWar TV show. Then there was a TekWar video game. I'd like to take a look at this oft-forgotten corner of William Shatner's career and see if we can't answer the question, how can such an expansive multimedia franchise have zero cultural impact, aside from occasionally being the butt of jokes?
Honestly, Dougal, you've got to broaden your mind a little bit.
What are you reading anyway?
Actually, I'm rereading it. William Shatner Tech Wars.
They didn't even have enough respect for the book to say its name right. It's not plural, there's only one TekWar. So rustle yourself up a soy calf, lace up your cyber Nikes, and follow me down the shat hole. After all, as a wise man once said,
well, the kids have to learn about TekWar sooner or later.
Alright, let's start at the beginning, the 9 TekWar novels. Now it's been said over and over again that the series was actually written by prolific sci-fi author Ron Goulart. Some people say that Shatner came up with the broad strokes and acted as a consultant during the writing process. Others say that Shatner had nothing to do with the books and was little more than a face whose big mug on the back of the book would sell it to Trekkies. Say no to him, I dare you. I mean, the word tech is a letter away from Trek, so it would make sense. Each book is preceded by a brief acknowledgement from Shatner, ambiguously implying that without Goulart, the books never would have been written. In his autobiography, Shatner states that his books were written with Goulart. The Mammoth Book of Comic Fantasy by Mike Ashley states that Goulart did, quote, most of the work on William Shatner's TekWar and its sequels. I don't know, man. In any case, I think it's safe to assume that Goulart probably did the lion's share of the writing, especially considering he worked professionally as a ghostwriter. Be a weird coincidence if Shatner just happened to strike up a friendship with a ghostwriter at the exact time that he went on to write a bunch of books. Now, I'm not convinced that Shatner had no involvement at all. His comments regarding TekWar being a pastiche of Star Trek and T.J. Hooker are just way too on the nose for it to be anything other than true. Who else but Shatner would look to those two properties simultaneously for inspiration? I think Shatner wrote TekWar the same way that Shatner wrote his 1968 cover of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. That is to say, somebody else did most of it, but his unmistakable voice can be heard throughout. TekWar takes place in the year 2120. A police officer named Jake Cardigan. Come on, that has to be Shatner. Who else but Shatner would think of the name Jake Cardigan and not leave it on the cutting room floor? Anyway, Cardigan is a cop with an addiction to a 22nd century drug called Tek, hence the name, and has been framed for trafficking the drug. He's been made to serve time in an off-world cryogenic prison where he'll be frozen for 15 years. Only 4 years into his sentence, he's released from the freezer thanks to the influence of a mysterious man named Walter Bascombe, head of the Cosmos Detective Agency. Unable to return to the police force and with questions about his framing, Cardigan agrees to work for Bascombe, becoming a private dick under his employ. Shenanigans ensue. The whole book series is sort of broken into episodes, each one presenting a new conflict and pitting Cardigan against a different adversary, specifically a Tek Lord. The Tek Lords are the big kahunas, the gang bosses that deal tech and rule the streets of greater Los Angeles, where much of TekWar is set. The world of the books is like an amalgamation of Golden Age sci-fi with spaceships, Jetson-style flying cars, and Asimov robots, with a light sprinkling of gritty consumerist dystopia that characterizes Cyberpunk. This is a very kitschy vision of the future where the aroma of baked goods is pumped through smell simulation devices at the local cyber mall, which is just a mall, but it's in the future. Technology is obviously a very important part of science fiction, and especially cyberpunk stories. Science and tech become increasingly invasive, yet undeniably convenient. This is what makes speculative fiction fun to read and meaningful to chew on. I know it's low-hanging fruit to look at old sci-fi and goof on the predictions, but I'm not above it. So much of the futuristic language in TekWar are these really goofy portmanteaus, like glow pants and techno-sex. That's all real, by the way. I didn't invent any of that stuff. It's from the books. My absolute favorite one is Xmas Fax. I did get an Xmas fax from her last year. I love the idea that not only are fax machines still widely used in the 22nd century, but it's so common to send people faxes at Christmas time that society has a dedicated term for it. Did you send a Telepurim-gram later that February? You should be expecting a message from my Quanzarier pigeon any day now. In some ways, the writing here is reminiscent of author Philip K. Dick. If you're familiar with his work, that might seem like an insanely high compliment to pay TekWar, so let me quickly temper that statement by saying Dick's prose wasn't all that strong, but many of the ideas he wrote about were compelling and, more importantly, brilliantly explored. That rising tide lifted all ships as far as his writing was concerned. There's sort of a golly gee shucks hokiness in Dick's worlds that contrasts against all of the metaphysical themes he's exploring. It's very intentional. The banal and the recognizable connects us to his worlds. The concept of a robotic goat or a subscription-based dishwasher may be kind of funny on its face, but these ideas are often digging at deeper truths or predictions, many of which have manifested themselves in ways that we never would have expected. The thing is that TekWar is honestly trying to be a badass neo-noir thriller. So when people, I don't know, smoke Astro cigars and go to the fly-in theater to see the latest Robo film or something and drink a Milky Way shake, it mostly comes across as kinda out of touch with the changing face of sci-fi. It's unintentionally charming now and then, but this vision of the future likely wouldn't have resonated with readers much at the time. You just can't be Xmas faxing people in a post-Neuromancer world, I hate to say it. So the very first book has Jake returning home from his 4 years of cryosleep. Cryosleep is a stupid-ass punishment. The point of a prison sentence isn't just to get somebody off the streets for an arbitrary period of time, it's to punish them. It's so that society receives justice, at least in theory. There's a similar element in the plot of the film Demolition Man, but they explain that prisoners are forcibly rehabilitated using advanced techniques. So at least that kind of makes sense, there's some retribution there. In TekWar, the prisoners get a nice little power nap. If a murderer gets sentenced to 25 years cryogenically frozen, they're basically taking a snooze and then going through a mildly uncomfortable process when they wake up. Some punishment that is. I mean, I guess your friends and family are older, and that does suck, but if you're a psychopathic serial killer, you probably don't really give a shit. When Jake returns home, he finds his entire life in disarray. His wife divorced his frozen ass and got remarried to a wealthy financier, taking their child and moving to Mexico. To top things off, because of his conviction and prior tech usage, Jake isn't allowed to be a cop anymore. Tech is an interesting facet of the world here. It's a drug which doubles as a virtual reality simulation. You load a device with tech, connect it to yourself via headset and electrodes, and you can essentially live out your wildest dreams in a way that feels completely real. Whether it's exploring your wildest sexual fantasies or simply reliving memories of your youth, tech offers its users an escape from the doldrums of daily life. While Jake was falsely accused of trafficking, he did actually have a tech addiction. That part is true. Coming home from prison and realizing that his family is gone triggers a relapse, and it's one of the better sections in the first book. You can see him bargaining with his own mind. For every reason he tells himself not to do it, his addictive personality has prepared a convincing retort. One would be enough. He'd do an hour of tech and then quit. Quit for good, probably. That would prove he could handle the stuff and wasn't dependent on it anymore. The qualifier probably does a lot of heavy lifting for an addict like Jake. You never want to completely cut yourself off from the possibility of using again. You want to beat the addiction because you know it's destroying you, but you also want the comfort of knowing it's an option. Just before Jake can put his headset on, his wife comes home with his son, Danny. She realizes that leaving him was a huge mistake. They all embrace, eager to pick up where they left off. But, of course, this is only a tech-induced hallucination. Jake's ex-partner on the force, Sid Gomez, finds him alone in his bedroom hooked up to tech. As he's disconnected from his fantasy, he becomes angry and disoriented, wondering where his wife and son are. The concept of a physically addictive method of escapism which doubles as virtual reality is a legitimately interesting idea and ripe for exploration. This is especially true in light of VR and its tantalizing ability to distract us from our day-to-day lives becoming more prevalent in our own reality. I also really like the fact that Jake is an addict. Having to constantly fight his demons on top of dealing with whatever larger conflict is arising in the book could add a dimension of vulnerability to his character, a great way to show his own growth and see how he contends with failure. But the book just totally fails to do anything with Jake's tech addiction. Once you're in the throes of addiction, it's the primary driving force of your life. It's what you think about when you wake up, it's what you plan your day around, so the fact that it just instantly takes a back seat after the scene kind of makes tech look not all that bad. It's described in the back of one of the comic books as smoking a cigarette, only with a virtual reality twist to it, and no smoke. I have to say, that doesn't really sound like a cigarette at all anymore. They probably should have just picked a better analogy. Tech, instead, is mostly used as a surrogate to bring the whole war on drugs into the world of TekWar. Indeed, this book came out in 1989 during the height of the Just Say No campaign. Jake's relationship with tech isn't introduced as a way to explore the nuances of tech use, nor his inner conflict as both an addict and a police officer. Rather, his personal history with tech is mostly just a reason for him to hate drugs more than anybody, and that's what TekWar is all about. It's a war on tech, see? It's about Jake shooting drugs, not up, but in the face. Lots of bad guys in TekWar use tech habitually and smoke not joints, but marijuana cigarettes. I can practically hear William Shatner fighting tooth and nail with Ron Goulart to have them called jazz cabbage rollies, but alas, they are marijuana cigarettes. So Gomez, who now works for Bascom rather than the police force, gets Jake a job at Cosmo's detective agency, where the two work as partners once again. Here, Jake finds new meaning in his life as a PI, which in this world basically just makes him a police officer again. As I mentioned, each book largely acts as a self-contained story, which means the stakes are never all that high. There's plenty of Deus Ex Machina resolving situations towards the tail end of books, like an earthquake killing the bad guys, or a surprise SWAT team showing up and saving Jake's ass. People die, but Jake never really feels like he's in real danger. As far as the quality of the writing goes, it's not great. First of all, the expository dialogue is ridiculous at times. Jake always thinks out loud. He literally can't stop describing things that he's thinking about, or even things that are currently happening. A great example of this is a part where Jake stumbles across a bunch of robotic bulls. They're dormant. Turned off, Jake said to himself after watching them for a few more seconds. Alright, so nobody would ever say, they're dormant, turned off, in response to something being dormant, turned off. You would just look at something and you'd know whether it was turned on or off. The black bull made a nasty sound, came galloping right at Jake. His horns were made of stainless steel, the tips knife sharp. Waiting until the giant robot was almost on him, Jake dodged to his left. The bull rushed by him and slammed into the wall, causing it to shudder. Maybe with some fancy footwork, Jake reflected, I can avoid these guys for a while. And then moments later he says, maybe I can maneuver them into crashing into each other. Jake's monologuing is the literary equivalent of a modern action-adventure video game where if you don't beat the boss in 20 seconds, your character starts saying things like, wonder if that chandelier above him will fall. Maybe that boomerang I found earlier. And while we're talking about the bulls, it's a good example of how stilted some of the action in TekWar feels. He stood still, wide-legged, trying to keep track of the actions of all three of the dangerous mechanisms. The other black one came galloping suddenly for him. Jake sprinted over to the opposite wall. The bull missed him. Jake pushed off the wall before the bull could get itself turned, then he ran straight at the Crimson Bull. That one lowered its head, pawed the floor, and charged. Turning, Jake started running toward the other bull. So action scenes in TekWar all have the rhythm of this haunted McDonald's creepypasta I read a while ago. We got terrified. I tried opening the door, but it was locked by a rusty master combination lock. We didn't have time to figure out the combination, so Zach pulled out his gun and shot at it. It was finally unlocked. In TekWar, it's not so much about guiding the reader through intentionally constructed passages to alter the emotional tempo of a scene. It's more just like a list of things that are happening. That's not a great approach when you're trying to build suspense. You want to use some descriptive language, kind of reveal things in a way that might surprise the reader. Imagine that Jake is on the ropes, putting himself in harm's way. Jake, what's he doing, you say to yourself. As the bulls close in, Jake smiles to himself. It becomes clear to the reader that he has a plan, but not clear what that plan is. In a nearly fatal gambit, Jake goads the bulls into charging at him. He dives out of the way at the last moment, causing them to collide in a twisted mass of steel and circuitry. We'd learn about Jake's character. He keeps a cool head and makes decisions quickly, but he's also a risk taker. Allowing the readers to simply witness and infer this instead of telling us outright impresses those facts upon us. Instead, Jake just announces, I'm gonna go ahead and make these bulls crash into each other now, and then he spends the page performing the necessary actions to make that happen. We know what Jake's thinking and doing because he can't shut the hell up about it. That kind of no-frills point A to point B writing works with some of the dialogue, but it results in some pretty lousy action. You read passages like, Kate glanced around nervously while Jake paid the sombreroed robot at the gateway of the indoor park, and you think to yourself, well, this has got to be the best book ever. But unfortunately, it's let down by some relentlessly boring action. The future as envisioned by William Shatner isn't totally devoid of interesting characteristics. Jake's assignment from Bascom is to find Leon and Beth Kittredge, a father and daughter research team who have been developing ways of neutralizing the properties of tech. Their plane went down over Mexico, and as an obvious target of tech lords looking to protect their businesses, it's looking like foul play. While searching for Beth Kittredge, Cardigan finds an android version of Beth built by the Kittredges. She looks identical and retains all of Beth's personality quirks and memories, but she's an Andy. They find mech offensive, you see. She joins Jake on his search for her creators. With his marriage in tatters, he begins to fall for the synthetic Beth despite having a bias against androids, and she develops feelings for Jake, for lack of better term. The energy of the story picks up a little bit here because Jake has somebody to bounce ideas off of and confide in. A human falling in love with a realistic android isn't the most original sci-fi concept, but it's a great way to explore some relevant themes. TekWar doesn't really do that. Jake and Beth's relationship is just weird. They don't have much in common or any reason to care about each other, but then every chapter or so, one of them kisses the other on the cheek. The relationship could have provided an interesting lens to explore Jake's conflicting feelings. How can I fall in love with someone that isn't human? This leads to a classic sci-fi question that binds both Jake and android Beth. What is a human? If she thinks and feels the same as Jake, what makes her so different from the real Beth? Can Jake ever be sure that she does think and feel the same as him? The possibilities here are endless. There are moments where Not Beth seems to have some existential awareness, but much like Jake's relationship with Tek, it never goes anywhere. Instead, her and Jake have a weirdly sterile relationship. Then she dies. Then Jake rescues the Kittredges, and he replaces her with the real Beth, who just inexplicably agrees to start dating Jake. But it happens between books, so we don't get to see him explain to her that he's already in love with her despite her not knowing who she is. She's just like, okay, yeah, it seems like I would probably date you, so I guess I'm gonna. The android Beth's death means nothing to the story, and she's treated as a stopgap until Jake can start dating the real Beth. Then the real Beth dies later. Then Jake is sad, but I think neither Shatner nor Goulart were up to the task of writing a man struggling with grief, so at the beginning of the 5th book, Jake just says, "It's time for me to move on," and then he's just fine after that. To be fair, when the real Beth dies, he's so upset that he relapses and uses Tek. Once again, it's just used as a relatively consequence-free way of showcasing that he's sad. His partner, Sid Gomez, who works with him at Cosmos, just finds him using Tek and says, "Jake, stay away from that stuff." And that's the end of it. By the way, there's a lot of Mexican characters in TekWar, and they all do that thing where, like, every sentence there's at least one errant Spanish word, like, "Watch it, Jake, they almost got you in the cabeza," or "The last thing I want is for you to turn up muerte." Look, I'm sure there are people who talk like this in real life, but I'm not kidding. Like, every Hispanic character in TekWar does this. It's Shatner's emergency inject personality button. There's a character named Winger, a humanoid robot who works for the GLA police department. He keeps tabs on Cardigan, acting as a sort of parole officer. He's an entertaining prick as a character and makes for a good rival for our protagonist, but unfortunately he only appears in the 1st book, which is a shame. Android Beth's death scene involves another concept that periodically shows up throughout the series, that being kamikaze robots. There's been a rash of killings around the US involving very human-like androids being reprogrammed to kill a specific target once they're in range. The way it's introduced is actually pretty clever. Jake and Gomez meet with an informant only to find themselves in the vicinity of an android bombing. It creates a sort of paranoia, like you have no idea who's real and who might be a literal ticking time bomb. I would say that unreality is a major theme throughout TekWar. Kamikaze bots impersonate humans to kill other bots who are also impersonating humans. Humans dress up like androids for the sake of high fashion and have sex with human-like androids for the sake of convenience. The plants are fake, the snow is fake, glass and metal are plastic, and Tek helps people create a fake reality for the sake of escape. Anyway, the kamikaze android thing, like everything else in TekWar, it's a neat idea that is just dreadfully underutilized. They basically wheel these things out whenever it's time for a dramatic moment and then forget about them every other time. Jake and Android Beth are walking around in Acapulco discussing their next steps. Suddenly, Jake sees his son, Dan. Not having seen him for some time now, Jake is elated and starts running towards Dan. "It's my son, Beth!" Jerking free of her, he started running. The boy was running too, dodging through the crowd. "Dad!" "No, don't!" Sprinting, Beth caught up with Jake. She gave him a sudden, rough shove. He stumbled to his left, fell to one knee. Beth kept running. It was she who met the boy. He tried to avoid her, his face growing dark with anger, but she threw both arms tight around him. They went staggering against the nearest plexiglass wall. The wall cracked. A whole jagged section broke free under their combined weight. Then came the explosion, while the two of them were still dropping. The remains of the two of them were flying and spinning, scattered forever. Twists of metal and plastic, shards of glass, unraveling ribbons of bright-colored wire. "He wasn't Dan, he was a kamikaze android sent to kill me," Jake said to himself. Beth sensed that. "Yeah, thanks, Jake. I got the gist." This fucking guy doesn't trust you to interpret anything. This whole scene immediately becomes comedy because Jake is like, let me run down what just happened here in case it wasn't all like very clearly explained already. Shatner once described TekWar to Entertainment Weekly as something you could read on airplanes and then throw away afterwards, which is either a backhanded thing to say about Goulart, his ghostwriter, or a strangely self-deprecating thing to say, especially after trying so hard to sell people on TekWar. I mean, this is a book for the cyberpunks, for crying out loud. Still, I can't say it's inaccurate. This is the way that the tech novels were meant to be enjoyed. You'd be looking at an airport newsstand during a layover and see tech power. Holy shit, a robot that looks like he's blowing a huge fart, Nazi death race cars, poodles for some reason. This has to be awesome. Then you find out that all those individual elements have almost no part to play in the story, which is a pulpy detective novel with some okay ideas here and there. I will say, the initial 3 books were given the audiobook treatment with Shatner as a narrator. The story was heavily abridged, giving more of a cinematic flavor, and you know what? It's not a bad way to experience TekWar, for whatever that statement is worth.
Hey, Jake, hop aboard. My uncle sent me to find you and he wants to talk to you.
I don't think I want to talk to him.
Hey, it's better than staying here, isn't it?
True.
Hell yeah. Gomez features prominently in the book, so if you've ever wanted to hear William Shatner very sheepishly speak with a Hispanic accent, this is your big chance.
I noted, amigo, one of them was doing some impromptu water ballet work, thanks to you.
In 1992, Marvel Comics picked up the rights to the Tek series, and Tek World was born.
A part of Marvel Comics called Epic Comics have taken it over, and they're doing Tek World. It's coming out in July.
Now, I don't know much about comic books, but in my uneducated opinion, these comics fare a lot better than the books. That linear, sequential storytelling actually works quite well in this format, and the action being visualized gives some sorely needed energy to the story. The world is surprisingly well realized here, and you do get some of that thick cyberpunk atmosphere that the books never quite nailed. The comics really benefited from the involvement of artist Lee Sullivan, who had previously worked with similar properties like RoboCop and Judge Dredd. That gritty, hard-boiled look combined with the fluorescent neon of the future suits TekWar really nicely. The comics also take place between the books, which gives them a chance to explore concepts only touched on previously, such as a near-future Mexican Civil War. The storytelling isn't all that original, and you won't find much here that other Marvel properties weren't already supplying, but the comics are pretty decent. About halfway through TekWorld's run, Shatner requested that Sullivan shift over to a new style. Characters would more closely resemble their look in a series of TekWar movies that had entered production. Unfortunately, TekWorld was cancelled along with many other series, when Marvel was forced to file for bankruptcy in 1996. As for the TekWar movies, they did manage to see the light of day. As it turns out, one of the co-owners of Atlantis Films was actually a fan of the TekWar books. Hey, there's no accounting for taste. Atlantis approached Universal Television with a pitch for a series based on the TekWar property. Universal agreed, but in a less than straightforward way. Instead of greenlighting a series, they instead agreed to produce 4 90-minute long made-for-TV movies. These would ostensibly act as a series pilot. If the movies found decent viewership, they would agree to move forward with a weekly television series. Because of this, the 4 TekWar movies that were produced are officially referred to as Season 1 of the television series. It's a bit of a convoluted format, but it was actually shared by a few other TV series on Universal's Action Pack block back in the day. Hercules: The Legendary Journeys actually began its life as 4 TV movies as well. Weirdly enough, a Smokey and the Bandit TV show was set to follow the same trajectory. One of those movies is called Bandit. Bandit. The first TekWar movie, which was directed by William Shatner himself, aired in 1994. When he'd begun writing the first novel back in the late 80s, he'd pictured himself in the role of Jake Cardigan. Now, recognizing he was too old to play the part, he cast himself as Bascom, leader of the Cosmos Detective Agency. Jake would be played by actor Greg Evigan. As the series was produced in Canada, the rest of the cast is a veritable who's who of Canuck TV actors. And I really mean that, who's who. I'm Canadian and I don't know most of these people. Anyway, how do the movies stack up? Let's find out by importing them from Germany because nobody within a 4,000-mile radius is selling them. Get used to this quality, by the way. I'm convinced that these movies only exist as bootleg VHS rips, even in their official release form. I guess it sort of adds a certain je ne sais quoi.
Heavy user at the time of his arrest.
The court finds you guilty and sentences you to 15 years in cryogenic incarceration.
The first movie is definitely the most faithful to the books. It opens in exactly the same way, with Jake Cardigan being released from cryosleep only 4 years into his 15-year sentence.
How long was I in? 4 years, 3 months, and 27 days.
Never a good sign when King Cobra JFS is your sleep paralysis demon.
You're not even the real Ozzy Osbourne. Are you fucking pathetic?
Winger. Wait a minute, Winger? But in the book it says the gleaming broad-shouldered robot was wearing a spotless white suit and his chrome face and skull were freshly polished. Who the hell is this?
A lot has changed since you went in.
Proceed.
Wait, where are they? In the book, the cryogenic facility is in space and they have to take a shuttle back to Earth. This is just Toronto, but with a blimp. Why is Winger driving a Meals on Wheels truck? This looks like something Garth Marenghi would take to work. What is happening? Well, allow me to explain. When the show was initially being pitched, Shatner knew that they wouldn't have a budget for anything interesting. You know, sombreroed robots, flying cars, glow pants. It was decided that instead of setting the show in 2120 like the books, it would take place in 2044. Pre-robots with sombreros, pre-pants that glow, pre-cars that fly. Winger is still an android, but he just looks like a human with a big brow line. The plasma guns and whatnot are still a part of the world, they just mostly look like normal guns. Jake drives a Jeep. It's just a Jeep, but it makes a really loud noise when he drives.
According to Dannenberg, Kitchens has a private lab.
Jake's house is just like a normal house that, I would live here, it looks pretty nice. But his house talks to him because ADR doesn't cost anything, and a talking house is vaguely futuristic.
Where's Kate?
Catherine is not here at the present time.
The books explain how brutally hot and muggy and depressing the city of GLA is, but I gotta tell you, the movies make it look like the nicest city ever. Plenty of space, nice architecture, even the criminals are friendly. They don't kill you or anything, they just say things like, "What's zoomin'?"
What's zoomin'?
It's hard to be afraid of somebody who says, "What's zoomin'?" And the costumes, good lord. Straight from Shatner's visionary mind, it's a standard group of people you'd see walking around Williamsburg. Now when I say low budget, I'm talking shoestring. While location scouting, they apparently had to find places where they could shoot for free, which for a Universal Pictures production is kinda slumming it. Jake's office, for instance, is in Toronto's Brookfield Place. I get it, you gotta do what you gotta do, but it is funny that they picked the single most recognizable place in Toronto to represent cyber future LA. So just like the books, Jake returns home to find that his family has abandoned him.
I'm sorry.
Katie.
You were a good man once.
Damn it!
He dulls the pain with Tek when Gomez suddenly arrives.
Hey! You! She was here! She was here! She was here, sir! It was this!
Can you imagine you're having an erotic dream, dry humping your sheets and making kissy noises, and all of a sudden your coworker stops by? Oh, the shame of it all. I do have to respect the propriety of a man who has access to literally any sexual fantasy he could dream up and chooses to kiss his wife. Anyway, Gomez shows up and he's not the same as he was in the books. He's taller and less Hispanic than was described. After briefly excoriating Jake for using Tek, which seems to do the trick as he's never tempted by it again, he lets Jake know that a job at Bascom's detective agency is waiting for him, and then Jake becomes detective. Jake, as played by Greg Evigan, is pretty entertaining. I wouldn't call it a nuanced performance, in fact it is about the most cliched portrayal of a loose cannon cop forced to turn in his badge I've ever seen. Remember McGarnagle from The Simpsons? Jake is just McGarnagle.
You busted up that crack house pretty bad, McGonagall. Did you really have to break so much furniture?
You tell me, Chief. You had a pretty good view from behind your desk.
She thinks bastards like you are the enemy.
But it's your job to persuade her to help us.
There's something going on in that devious brain of yours that has nothing to do with saving this world from Tek.
Man, this dialogue would make Max Payne weep. Sometimes Jake is a cool-headed, wisecracking smartass.
Can he turn his back on you? That's a good reason to want him dead.
Other times he's a hot-headed rule breaker.
What the hell is going on?
And not a whole lot in between. He's a man of extremes, I'll put it that way. His boss, Bascom, as played by William Shatner, is definitely a highlight. After the comics, I was prepared for Bascom to be a dangerous, secretive, and pragmatic man. Now he's just William Shatner. It's just William Shatner being William Shatner, but that's enjoyable in its own way.
Now what the hell do the tech lords and the kamikaze androids have to do with a routine insurance case?
I was waiting to see how long it would take the real Jake Cardigan to thaw out, Sandra.
Sid Gomez is played by actor Eugene Clark, and he's doing his best with what he's been given, but man, Sid and Jake just have like minus chemistry in these movies.
Why, Mr. Jake Cardigan, sounds to me like you're trying to flout authority yet again.
Flout?
Yeah, to scorn, show open contemptuousness.
What'd you do, buy yourself one of those vocabulary power interactives or something?
Yeah, and what if I did?
Hey, nothing.
You were the first real buddy I ever had. But if you and he wish to be best buddies again, I won't stand in your way.
I've got a best buddy, Sanj. But some shit sticks, no matter how hard you scrape. Hang back.
You got it.
They're supposed to be old buddies, but I really don't get that sense. Gomez is temporarily taken out of the picture fairly early on when a kamikaze robot shows up in probably one of the best scenes in the TekWar saga. Jake struggling to find his gun, only for him to then be aiming the biggest gun anyone has ever held. Jake's reaction is perfect. It's like he's remembering the cool guys don't look at explosions rule, yet curiosity is getting the better of him.
Well, you look like hell.
Actually, considering he was just in an explosion, I would say he looks pretty good.
Called Kamikaze. A little wrinkle the tech lords came up with during the Kyoto Gang Wars 2 years ago. Programmed to eliminate their designated target.
See, he's even able to deliver a bunch of expository dialogue, which is necessary because they really tried to cram this whole ass book into 90 minutes. As a result of that time crunch, there are so many characters who show up for the express purpose of giving Jake info that moves him to the next scene, and then they're promptly forgotten. This might be one of the most disposable casts of characters I've ever seen in a movie. There is just no time to linger here. Most of the acting here is pretty rough too.
Got it. Yeehaw! It has left the back door wide open.
Her heart was not in that yeehaw. Where a take is unusable, ADR is used very often to cover things up. That is, additional dialogue recording, dubbing.
How's this thing supposed to work?
In layman's terms, it bounces a beam off a satellite, setting up oscillations calibrated to destroy the cellular structure of the tech chip itself.
I'd hate to hear the scientific version.
So with Gomez out of commission, Jake has to go it alone. There's a crime boss in the books named Sonny Hokori who plays a much more immediate role in the movies, mostly because they needed a villain, presumably. Turns out that it was Hokori who framed Jake, so he meets him at a factory outside of town to take care of unfinished business.
This is where you killed your partners, right where you're standing.
Alright, Sonny, we got about 7 seconds to deliver 4 minutes of exposition, so on your mark, get set, go.
You were selling us tech you confiscated on the streets. Your partner discovered what you're up to, so you killed them to save yourself and your precious reputation. Lie! Why would I lie to you, Jake? We're the same, you and I!
I have never in my life seen a movie that had the gall to include the line, "We're the same, you and I," and not have it be a joke. Sonny's men come to his rescue, and I have to say, they are not an effective fighting force. Jake loves grabbing onto things and kicking people. One thing you'll notice about action scenes, they're usually so underexposed that you can't actually tell what's going on, and I think that may have been intentional. Why did he punch like that? Why did he punch like that? Why was the man with depth perception issues sent to pursue Jake? Moreover, why don't they have guns? Everybody has guns in this world, except for the guys that need them. I mean, they're trying to kill Jake, right? Sonny is gassed up as this criminal mastermind. Maybe it's the fact that he was introduced to us running away from Jake.
Hey, I just want to talk to you.
Maybe it's his screen presence. Maybe it's his knucklehead bodyguards, but Sonny doesn't make a particularly threatening villain to me. But it's not about what I want, it's about what TekWar wants. And TekWar wants Sonny Hokori to be the villain for the next 4 movies, so I guess that's just what's gonna happen. It turns out that Sonny wasn't present at all, he was only using a holo projector. You remember that for later, alright? Chekhov's gun is locked and loaded. You're about to get a writing masterclass from TekWar, so pay attention.
Make it soon, Sonny boy.
Jake is told he has to find Leon and Beth Kittredge, which in the books takes him to Mexico in the middle of a revolutionary war. Here he finds a resistance leader calling herself War Bride, an ex-lover of Jake's who has information. He stumbles across the Kittredge lab where he meets Robo-Beth for the first time. It's kind of a cool aside, just because you don't really see Latin America portrayed in cyberpunk fiction all that often, and also the rainforests of Mexico are a nice reprieve from all the metropolitan locations. In the movies, Jake doesn't go to Mexico, he goes to like a field outside of Toronto. This establishing shot just screams cyberpunk, doesn't it? Jake finds the android Beth, played by Tori Higginson, who went on to have a major role in one of the Stargate TV series.
I'm Beth.
Hell, you are. You're a mech.
I'm an android.
Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of chemistry going on between android Beth and Jake either.
There's things you'll never understand, no matter how much data the professor pumped into your circuits.
Don't underestimate my capacity for human emotion. Would you come in and wash my back?
Don't underestimate my capacity for human emotions.
No? Not gonna do another take? Okay. Alright.
What does it mean to be in love?
It's when someone else's life means more than your own.
One part I definitely don't remember from the book is when android Beth and Jake go to an ice rink to fight a hockey-playing robot.
Hold it!
Gotcha, bitch. Damn it, I can't tell which one's the real Beth.
Pucker up.
I'm somewhere between I can't believe they rushed through every dialogue sequence to make room for this scene, and I'm so glad they rushed through every dialogue sequence to make room for this scene. The action in this movie is just absurd.
I had the same reaction myself. Get in.
Hey, wait, no, you guys aren't gonna drive away, are you? Come back. Since there's no Mexico in this movie, War Bride, played by Sheena Easton, big get, is no longer the leader of a Mexican Revolutionary Front. She's just like an eco-terrorist or something? I don't know. Every time War Bride is on screen, she's delivering exposition, but I still don't really have a sense of what she wants or how she fits into the world of TekWar.
And I shall remain the bride of war and revolution until my country, the earth, is returned to the plants, the animals, and the people it belongs to.
She just commands a paramilitary force like half a mile outside of Los Angeles and nobody's doing anything about it. She and Jake share an uncomfortable kiss while android Beth gives the dreaded gritted teeth glance. My jealousy inhibitors are being overloaded. She's basically just here to be like, Jake, Sonny's base is over there. Now let us never speak again. And, you know, that's it for War Bride. Shortly after their meeting, disaster strikes. Ah!
Dad! Over here! Dad! Dad! Manny!
It takes him like 15 dads before he even responds. What's wrong with this guy?
I love you.
Why? Why would a man be dressed as Elvis behind Jake? We immediately cut to the next scene where Jake and Sid are infiltrating Hokori's base. Jake doesn't grieve, Jake feels nothing.
Don't underestimate my capacity for human emotions.
That's the end of android Beth. She served absolutely no purpose. God bless her. Now the movie couldn't end without at least one more dopey action sequence. Holy shit. Grab the bar, Jake. Yeah! At long last, the great holographic Sonny Hokori gag pays off.
Do it! Got the opportunity!
All we have to do
Kill me, man.
is figure out what the real Hokori do.
Come on, Jake.
Shoot me in the back!
Cheesy as hell, but you know what? It has soul. It also uses the same stock sound effect as the rocket launcher from GoldenEye. If you want to have fun watching TekWar, you gotta play Find the GoldenEye sound effect. That and Spot the Boom Mic, which becomes a full-time gig by the time the TV series rolls around. So Jake finds the Kittredges, the real Beth loves him because she just does, and in another deviation from the book, Winger has been reprogrammed by Sonny and attempts to kill Jake.
Now you'll never know who reprogrammed my circuit.
Enjoy these practical effects because I'm telling you, this is as good as it gets. And that was TekWar. But hold on to your hats because we're jumping right into the next movie here. Following immediately after TekWar is TekLords, which, despite sharing a name with the second book in the series, treads a very different path. The name of the movie in German is The Princes of Death, which is a categorically more badass name, but you take what you can get. I think at some point they realized that the change in setting fundamentally alters the tone of pretty much everything. All of these little robotic assistants, the space travel, the globe-trotting adventure, and neon jungle of the future, it's all gone anyway, so it just made sense to rewrite the movies wholesale. Though the basic plot is the same as the book. There's a computer virus that somehow infects people and kills them.
Commissioner Haskell wants more proof that there's a threat to internet.
When everything is computers, there's always threat to internet. It becomes personal when Jake's ex-wife is infected, giving him only a short time to find a cure. The internet had become much more of a thing in the years since those first few books were written, so there's a stronger focus on cyberspace in the movies. The production designer for the TekWar movies, Stephen Roloff, was apparently a huge fan of William Gibson's Neuromancer, which had a strong influence on the aesthetics of the movies. Namely, there are plenty of cyberspace sequences where people are hooked up to decks and surfing a virtual instance of the World Wide Web. The 3D animation in those scenes would have still been relatively novel for the time, but in hindsight, they don't do much for the films other than disrupt the pacing for 5 minutes at a time. There's only so many times you can watch someone flail their limbs around while basic CGI is superimposed in front of them. Some of the tech talk and cyber slang that's used actually isn't too bad, at least in the computer-focused sections.
All I'm getting are infinite loops and false conditionals.
During most of the exchanges, whenever dialogue tries to dig at that free-form Neuromancer-type dialect, it's just dopey.
Oh, Trismo!
The first movie suffered from setup syndrome, where so much of its limited runtime was spent introducing characters, many of whom we'll never see again. The second movie suffers from explanation syndrome, where the characters have to spell out everything that's going on, leading to these endless scenes of dialogue.
I mean, Kate got zapped after she talked to me.
After she saw you in person. Maybe that part was a coincidence. Yeah. Except, first rule.
This movie deals much more with Jake's divorce and Kate's marriage to Bennett Sands.
She made this, you know, during her pottery phase.
I get that he's upset, but like, you were arrested for drug trafficking and sentenced to 15 years in ICE prison. Is it that insane to imagine your wife might want to move on with her life? Also, you've literally been in 2 relationships since you were unfrozen last week, one of them being a robot, and you made out with Sheena Easton publicly. Jake interacts with his son a lot in this movie.
Bennett says he's gonna let me drive it.
His son kinda sucks. I don't really know how to explain it, but I wish he'd get kicked in the head. Stepdad Bennett is trying to formally adopt Dan, so he shows up to the park in a limousine. A state-of-the-art 2044 limousine.
When he was a kid, there was these birds that used to just live in the city.
Get out.
Okay, I literally just heard seagulls at Jake's house like 5 minutes ago. I don't know, maybe they're the apex predators. So with Kate sick and Dan between fathers right now, which is beyond perfect actually, since Greg Evigan starred in My Two Dads. It's not a gay show, they're just 2 dads. There's a rivalry building between Bennett Sands and Jake Cardigan. Out of my way, I'm very rich and the bad guy.
I'm gonna kill you. I hate to disappoint you, Bennett, but there's nothing left for you to kill.
TekWar will return after a commercial interruption on USA.
While you're in bed and sweetly dreaming, somebody's mama is making biscuits made from scratch, hot and steaming. fresh from the kitchen at Hardee's.
Hey Bennett, good news. I'm not dead inside anymore. The movie also digs into Sonny Hokori's past. His parents died when he was just a child, so he and his sister were raised as orphans.
So you're 11 years old. Your family's dead. What do you do?
I don't know, mourn. His sister died, but somehow had her consciousness uploaded into internet, and now she's trying to infect people with a computer virus so she and Sonny can, I don't know, rule the world or something, I guess. Sarcastically, there's some great action scenes in this movie, in between these endless, lingering, establishing shots.
Did I happen to mention that the first word on my vocabulary power
I can't see anything. What's happening right now?
Afraid of heights and don't look down.
If I look up, I'll trip.
Well, then don't look up. Just close your eyes and pray.
What was that transition?
Pray!
How did they even get on top of the building? I want to see things happening. Just pointing the camera at nothing and having the characters discuss what's going on isn't interesting. Oh, this turret sucks so much ass. Just shoot them already, you hunk of junk. In the end, we get another epic Sonny Hokori showdown, and you know what? Sonny's got some decent moves. The visuals are obviously a little muddy, but I think the lighting and silhouetting of the characters is quite striking. The only thing that would make this better is if Jake grabbed a bar for no reason to kick Sonny. Oh yeah. The Hokori's evil plan goes awry, the base explodes, probably looked a lot better on your 1991 Zenith CRT, Jake's wife is cured, some degree of reconciliation is implied. That's Tech Lords.
It's worse when you're awake.
Up next is Tech Lab, and it is certainly the weirdest case among the TV movies. I watched this movie twice for some reason, and the Tech Lab dichotomy, as far as I can figure, is one characterized by pure absurdity meeting unrelenting boredom. I suppose that's just the TekWar dichotomy. Tech Lab begins at a gala hosted by an English family, comprised of several English people, but mostly Canadian actors doing very unconvincing English accents.
Are you all right, Your Royal Highness?
As long as that damned alarm hasn't destroyed my hearing, one would think it was an air raid.
In TekWar's future, the monarchy has been dissolved, but the monarchist party seeks to democratically put an aging Prince Albert back on the throne.
If we're to restore the monarchy, all of this, we need public support.
It's just the sort of elitism this gala endorses that led to the overthrow of the monarchy in the first place.
Pay attention. People go to film school for years to learn how to master exposition to this level.
Oh, you know, I don't know how to break this to you, Sid, but, you know, the British monarchy's dead. Has been for 50 years. And Camelot never was.
Camelot stood for some cool ideals like honor, loyalty, trust, punctuality.
Well, 3 out of 4 ain't bad.
Also, for some reason, Jake and Sid are at the gala because I guess the monarchist party of England's grand ambitions for the throne somehow involve establishing a relationship with a private detective agency working out of Los Angeles. During the event, which is being hosted in a museum, a group of thieves disguised as statues of knights managed to steal Excalibur. As in, the sword Excalibur. The legendary sword that does not exist in real life. They take it, Prince Albert is found dead.
Whoever did this will pay with his life. My word on it, Father.
Here lies a great man. Father!
And they manage to escape from their pursuers. Nobody has ever collided with another person like that in the history of collisions. With the prospective king murdered, Richard, played by actual professional actor Michael York, becomes head of the monarchist party and next in line for the throne. Speaking of professional actors, Richard's love interest? Rachel is played by Laurie Holden, one of precious few actors who managed to break the TekWar curse. I don't know much about the television shows, but if you've watched The Boys or The Walking Dead, you'll probably recognize her. I'm proud of her, even though her English accent is not very good.
He's at his private club for a couple of hours more. The British Empire Club.
There's a mystery afoot, which means Jake and Sid are back on the case.
Resurrected and reprogrammed.
Wait, why is Winger back?
If he wanted quality help, he should have hired a droid.
Bro, you were literally reprogrammed to become evil one movie ago. If it could happen once, it could probably happen again. Bascombe, as a dear friend of Prince Albert, is taking the case very personally.
Well, then use me. Put me to work. I thought this Prince Albert was a friend of yours.
Hey, you got Prince Albert in a can? Well, you better let him out, because he's dying in there. And if you don't watch your ass, you're going to be next, big guy.
Excalibur's worth isn't in the precious metals it's made of, it's in its meaning. It's a symbol of truth in a corrupt world. Without it, the king can't take the throne.
I need to know that William Shatner knows that Excalibur isn't real. In the world of TekWar, being in possession of Excalibur proves the legitimacy of your claim to the English throne, which is just completely insane.
The legend of King Arthur says whoever has Excalibur is the true king.
The book that this movie is based on, also called Tech Labs, 2 features an Excalibur. It's the name of a criminal syndicate trying to manipulate English politics. It's like the people adapting the book saw the word Excalibur and they were like, yeah, okay, I guess that's what the movie will be about. And William Shatner, because he didn't actually write the books, was like, yep, that's right, you got it, it's about the sword. Michael York as Richard undoubtedly steals the show. Even with some pretty hack dialogue, he does a good job of chewing the scenery and coming across as a pompous yet charismatic ass.
Unlike Tek, this is not a fantasy game.
Jake heads to the British Empire Club, which is apparently a thing in Neo-Los Angeles, to have a chat with Richard, who challenges Jake to a virtual sword fight.
Welcome to Camelot, Mr. Cardigan.
It's not Camelot. I don't know what castle that is, but I have a feeling it's within driving distance of Toronto, and there's a canteen in the basement where you can pay $16 for a poutine made with canned gravy. Richard's televised address regarding the death of his father is interrupted by hackers.
Richard Stewart shall not be king. He cannot rule without Excalibur, and he no longer has it.
That's the man who killed my father.
I'd like to remind you that this is a futuristic cyberpunk detective show. With the hacker signal triangulated, Jake and Sid head to jolly old England, or as I like to call it, Toronto, but there's a guy dressed as an English Bobby. Also, sometimes there's some Cockney ADR in the background to remind you that it's England.
Hope you don't mind sharing, guys.
They almost would have been better off taking the Wayne's World 2 route here.
I can't believe Paramount is spending the money to fly us to England. I would have thought they would just use 2 doubles. Here we are at Piccadilly Circus.
Wow, what a shitty circus.
Jake and Sid end up befriending this Coronation Street ass-looking cab driver who has more personality than most of the main characters of the film.
Not many of us don't know where the king lives, Doc.
Yes, I don't know what he just said, but this guy is the best.
All of the English characters are hilariously stereotypical. They talk to some nattering old woman at one point and it's just Margaret Thatcher. All of the beggars and vagabonds are like 1970s British punks. London is supposed to be in utter turmoil right now because of some political unrest, but they communicate that by showing like 3 guys throwing rocks at a building. There's also a part of town inhabited by what they like to call tech kids, which are supposed to be the children of tech users. Now in the book, tech kids often have special abilities like telekinesis, but that was not in the budget. So now the defining trait of tech kids is that they just look like Oliver Twist characters, I guess, and for some reason live together. Jake and Sid find a bunch of them living in the London sewers. They're led by the man who stole Excalibur, who calls himself Tristan.
You'll have to forgive their anger, you see. Tek destroyed their parents and left them damaged.
Not only does Tristan plead his own innocence, but he declares himself the rightful king, Richard a scumbag liar, and Rachel his Guinevere.
You swore an oath of loyalty when you chose to lead the Tech Kids. I also love Guinevere.
You'd think a group of people who have devoted their lives to LARPing as the Round Table might know that Guinevere is King Arthur's wife, not Tristan's. Stupid. Wait, why is this movie even called Tech Lab? The book was all about a laboratory producing a potent variant of tech called Super Tech. This movie is about British sewer children fighting over a throne they don't have a legal claim to.
Once the new Tech Lab becomes fully operational.
Okay, I stand corrected. There is a single use of the word Tech Lab, but I mean, the movie deviates so much, they should have just called it like Tech Legend or TekScalibur or something. So Tristan is actually Prince Richard's cousin Mark.
It was my cousin, Mark.
Could have at least called him Marcus if you wanted to give him an air of royalty. Fucking King Mark. Oh. I'll be damned. I don't even want to unravel the implications of all this. Rachel is Mark's woman on the inside. She threatens Richard with a butter knife. Richard threatens her with a butter knife. You got a license for that thing, pal? Mark and Richard have a sword fight. Richard goes apeshit with an axe. Justice is served.
Queen Guinevere. Sort of has a nice ring to it.
I think Tech Lab is best summed up by Morgan Muffle's letterboxed review of the film. They made a pilot film that feels like a filler episode. How? Good question, Morgan. Here's the thing. These TV movies were developed as the foundation of the TekWar multimedia empire. The stories and themes worthy of exploration at this stage in the game are quite grounded and don't even necessitate a high budget. Jake having to develop a new identity after his badge is taken away. establishing Jake's rapport with Sid, exploring the mysteries behind Bascom as a character. Build a strong foundation, and then you have license to put the characters in zany situations. I don't want to see Jake and Sid running around trying to restore the monarchy because I don't care about either of them or this world yet. You only have 4 movies to establish Jake Cardigan and the world of 2044. You just spent one of them teaching us nothing about him or the world, aside from the fact that there's no monarchy, which could have been communicated with like a line or two of dialogue. Beth is nowhere to be found, Jake doesn't interact with his family, it's strictly plot-driven, and the plot is too stupid to be taken seriously and not quite stupid enough to be mindlessly entertaining. With one movie left, can TekWar turn things around? No. Tech Justice, which is the only movie not to be named after a book, might be the worst of the bunch. The movie begins with Jake confessing to the murder of Bennett Sands, who I will remind you is Jake's ex-wife's new rich mustache husband.
Call the precinct. I want him brought in.
I can't see what's happening. Can somebody please turn some lights on? The thing is, all of the evidence points to Jake's innocence, leaving us wondering why exactly he's putting himself on the chopping block. The twist is that Danny is the one who killed Bennett Sands, apparently in self-defense.
What am I gonna say? Oh, Mom, I forgot. I killed your second husband, and I'm letting the first one take the rap.
This actually isn't a bad little twist. It leaves the viewer on the hook for the first half hour or so, as Jake refuses to tell Beth, Sid, Bascom, or his child genius lawyer what's really going on.
How can you two argue about food at a time like this?
This town is full of monsters.
Oh yeah, for some reason his lawyer is a child. He's cocky and sits right on the precipice of being an annoying little shit, but manages to pull it back enough, and it's kind of a fun character as a result.
And I object to the prosecutor referring to me as boy.
So most of the movie plays out like a laborious courtroom drama. They're like, why Jake? And he's like, no. And then there's a cross-examination, and then they're like, why Jake again? And he's like, no. And it just goes on like that. Occasionally the monotony is broken up by Jake injuring a child or somehow taking on an entire courtroom full of security guards. But then he's like, I apologized, and the trial goes on. The twist on top of the twist is that Sonny Hokori's henchwoman was actually the one who killed Bennett. Danny was gonna shoot him, but then his gun jammed or something, and then this lady happened to be there. So she killed him instead. It's just the contrived way of making sure none of the good characters have to take any sort of responsibility or suffer consequences. The whole Sonny Hokori subplot is wrapped up as he is electrocuted and killed. There goes Sonny Hokori, the biggest ass that ever lived. Reportedly, the movie was going to play out quite differently, but the actor who played Bennett Sands passed away before production began. As a result, they altered the script to make the prime mover of the plot Sands' off-screen murder. The concept of Dan being accused of murder is pulled from the novel Tek Money, but aside from that, we're pretty far away from the source material. Frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if having the entire movie take place in a courtroom was a cost-saving maneuver at this point. Now that we're finished with the movies, I can talk about them as a unit. These are Canadian, made-for-TV movies from the 1990s. TekWar is the kind of thing you'd put on when you were homesick from school in the 90s because it was marginally more entertaining than Antiques Roadshow or The View, and Popular Mechanics for Kids wouldn't be on for another 45 minutes. If you go in with that expectation, TekWar basically rises to the occasion. There are some redeeming qualities to these films, especially considering how nothing the budget was. In between the generic locales, there are some decent set and prop designs. The lighting is surprisingly competent at times, doing a nice job of establishing the neo-noir mood. Shatner and Evigan do a respectable job of navigating some unimaginative scripts as well. Sadly, I don't have much by kindnesses to offer the films aside from this. The pacing just languishes here, the fight scenes are badly lit and choreographed, and the acting is pretty stiff. The greatest sin of the TekWar movies is that more often than not, they're boring. They had the ingredients here. We need 800% more Shatner, more goofy special effects, and more quirky character interactions. It wouldn't have been great, but at least it would have been interesting that way. There are these brief, fleeting moments of personality that shine through, but these parts are almost always undercut by another scene where characters with no charisma just waste runtime talking about nothing memorable. There are so many disposable characters across these movies, bit parts that show up for no other reason than to tell Jake where to go next. On that note, Jake is a terrible detective. He doesn't deduce any information. He's just lucky enough to know a bunch of people who can. The entire reason that Bascom used his vast political connections to get Jake unfrozen is that he's supposed to be the best of the best. There's very little here to demonstrate this to be the case.
Don't underestimate my capacity for human emotions.
As discussed, production of a TekWar TV series was contingent on these TV movies performing well. I've already told you that a TV series was produced, so I suppose it goes without saying that the movies were, in fact, successful. According to Variety magazine, stations that picked up the action-packed programming block for syndication had generated, quote, huge ratings boosts, with TekWar as its shining star. The rights to a TekWar TV series were picked up by the USA Network. The series premiere aired in January of 1995 to surprisingly massive success. At the time, episode 1 of TekWar was the highest-rated premiere in the history of basic cable TV. Unfortunately, this success wouldn't last. Within a few episodes, rating had dropped off significantly, and it continued to hemorrhage viewership until it was cancelled a little over halfway into its first and only season. Still, given the success of the movies, ratings don't mean much, do they? Well, it is with no small amount of pleasure I tell you that the TekWar series is actually a far sight better than its TV movie predecessors. The series acts as a continuation of the movies. Jake is working full-time with his partner Gomez at Bascom's detective agency. Beth, the real Beth, is still romantically involved with Jake, and the Tech Lords continue to wage their tech war against the forces of tech justice. The series follows a format typical of police shows. The cold open shows us the inciting incident, Jake and his colleagues somehow become involved, new characters are introduced to help move things along, and the conflict reaches a boiling point before things are resolved in time for the next episode. The TV series succeeds in many areas where the movies failed, and that's largely thanks to the time constraint. With just 45 minutes instead of 90, the pace is so much brisker. Characters and plot elements are only introduced if they're necessary. I don't subscribe to a totally utilitarian view on storytelling, but it's probably the right way to handle an action-heavy police TV series. Michael Mann can get away with making 4 minutes of driving interesting. William Shatner, I'm sorry to say, cannot. Also, enjoy this shot because this is apparently the only place where anyone ever drives in the city of GLA. The first episode is titled Sellout, and it's a bit of a strange way to kick off the series. There's a TV shopping personality named Marty Dollar, who's a total ripoff of Bixby Snyder from RoboCop.
Because you have made me stinking rich!
I'd buy that for $1.
But that's neither here nor there. Beth, who's being neglected by a workaholic Jake, orders a dress from Marty, only to have the man himself personally hand-deliver it to her.
I'm not a celebrity.
You are to me.
It turns out that Marty, who's been working behind the scenes trying to stamp out tech, is familiar with Beth's work in the field of science. He offers her a job at his laboratory, researching ways to remove the addictive qualities from tech, and she accepts. But Jake doesn't trust the shifty salesman.
When I see Beth with Marty Dollar, my gut burns like hell.
It turns out that Marty's company is developing a music player that interfaces directly with the user's brain. He was having Beth isolate the addictive compounds of tech, not to remove them, but to utilize them in his own software, making his music players the most addictive product in the world.
He's transmitting the diphenyramine over the network. And I made the diphenyramine.
Jake, Sid, and Bascom organize a plan to save the day, and Marty Dollar is stuffed into the freezer where he belongs. Will he wake up from cryostasis and try this all over again? That's the future's problem. Also, there's a boom mic. It's a cockamamie plot, to be sure, but it's an entertaining first episode. For one thing, it actually involves tech. You know, that thing that the series is named after. We get a look at some retro-futuristic gadgets, there's an entertaining villain with snappy dialogue, and the episode includes a fun bait-and-switch that tricks the viewer into thinking Jake is getting wasted at a party and having his ass kicked by William Shatner.
You're drunk. Why don't you go home?
Why don't you go to hell?
We touch on some cyberpunk themes of hyper-consumerism. Shatner also has more screen time in this episode than all of the movies combined, and his hammy acting brings the detective agency to life.
Simple enough.
Nice performance, Walter.
I rather thought so.
Oh, even when he flubs a line, he's charming. The episode ends with a valuable lesson. If you're a woman, you should stay home instead of pursuing your dreams.
Jake, I'm sorry. I should have listened to you.
You're damn right. The special effects are still what they are, and I think Jake accidentally said call in the cavalry instead of the cavalry.
Call in the cavalry.
We can't just bring Golgotha to Toronto, Jake. Nonetheless, the series gets off to a not horrible start, and I must admit, I'm surprised. The show periodically digs into Jake's past, which makes him a more sympathetic character. This is something that was sorely needed in the films, but hey, better late than never, I guess. In the episode Unknown Soldier, Jake meets a woman named Electra. She fought in a conflict referred to as the Brazilian War, along with Jake's brother Daniel, who went missing shortly after being shipped off. We find out that Electra was actually cybernetically enhanced as a result of a wartime experiment. She was given a list of assassination targets who she believes are responsible for the slaughter of her unit in Brazil.
You are responsible for the soldiers who were needlessly sent to their deaths at the Battle of São Marco.
In the end, we find that she was being used as a tool to silence dissent by the man who was truly responsible for her suffering.
The blood of innocent people is on my hands because of you!
Once again, episodes like this work because we're given reasons to care. Jake and Electra, on top of actually having some rapport, have troubled pasts with common ties. The situation she's in leaves her trapped on an impossible tightrope, forcing her to contend with the horrible things she's been made to do. The fact that she's a biologically modified super soldier is also a nice reminder that, indeed, we are in the future, but without dipping into the effects budget. In addition to the tighter plots, there's also seemingly been an uptick in overall production value. There are more sets with some futuristic elements. Indoor environments have a garish artificial look, which actually works here because this world is supposed to be made of plastic. Plastglass, plastisteel, what have you. High-tech props and rifles look marginally less ridiculous than they did in the movies. See, this is the kind of low-budget Cyberpunk TV show I might voluntarily put on while waiting for popular mechanics for kids. With that in mind, I do want to say that this is still not a good show, broadly speaking. It still suffers from many of the problems of the movies, including some pretty slipshod plot lines, characters that serve little purpose beyond tethering scenes together, and a lack of believability in Jake's relationships with others. Primarily his relationship with Beth. Beth is simply not an interesting character, and I struggle to think of any defining characteristics she has. She's reportedly very smart, being a biologist who's also an expert in AI or something, but we never really get to see that intelligence on display. Sometimes Bascom will be like, Beth, we need your expertise. And she'll be like, leave it to me, and she'll sit down at a computer, and then there'll be a commercial break, and then when it comes back, she'll have done the thing. Then she'll show up at the end of the episode to give Jake kisses and remind us that she exists. Don't worry though, their utter lack of chemistry won't be a problem for long, as in the 4th episode, Beth dies in a car bombing.
That's not one of our cars! No!
Don't underestimate my capacity for human emotions.
But then it turns out it was actually just a hologram to fool the bad guys who wanted to kill her, and she runs away with her old boyfriend. Everybody wave goodbye to Beth. She had a good run. Literally 1 episode later, Jake is already moving on while undercover as a Motley Crue fan. Speaking of relationships that don't amount to much, Jake and Sid are no Crockett and Tubbs. Greg Evigan is not giving the performance of a lifetime, but he looks like Humphrey Bogart next to Eugene Clark.
If he can take down an attorney general, he can take down anybody, anywhere.
Slow down. You're not making much sense.
He never seems to be relaxed or developing any kind of casual relationship with Jake. And I don't mean it in a he's just a high-strung detective kind of way. I mean it in a it seems like he's always waiting to deliver his next line and that's about it kind of way.
Did you know that perfume produces a slightly different scent on everybody's person?
Gee, I didn't know that.
But again, I can't strictly blame Clark. The writers seemingly didn't know what to do with his character.
Donuts. He's buying donuts?
12 credits, please.
Oh, man.
He's just a guy who gets Jake out of trouble, and that's not interesting. Once again, the show takes care of business by killing Sid in the 7th episode. That's everybody. All of Jake's loved ones are gone now. I bet you the cast and crew noticed the craft services table looking a little lean by this time. Once the deviled eggs start drying up, you know your show is about 10 episodes away from being shit-canned. It's around this time that we're introduced to Sam Houston, played by actress Maria Del Mar, which is Spanish for Maria of the Sea.
I know lots about you, Cardigan, and there's lots I don't like.
Yeah, well, I don't like a desk jockey coming along hijacking my case.
She initially works as a police lieutenant, but then decides to quit and join Cosmo's detective agency because the plot demands it. Now, I have a theory. It was right around this time that The X-Files was reaching its peak popularity. What do people like about The X-Files? Of course, there's the aliens and spooky plots, but the heart of the show is Mulder and Scully. Audiences loved Mulder and Scully. They loved the way they worked together, they loved the way they butted heads, and they loved the lingering sexual tension that was constantly being teased between the two. I speculate that the showrunners for TekWar saw this beloved dynamic in a show whose popularity was eclipsed only by Seinfeld and thought to themselves, we can do that. In fact, not only can we do that, but we can pay one actor instead of two. Sam Houston is brought on to serve as both Jake's romantic interest and his partner. For what it's worth, it's not a complete failure. The relationship between Jake and Sam is at least somewhat believable. You'd be amazed how quickly such integral characters as Beth and Sid can just be quietly forgotten. It's also around this time that Bascom just stops showing up. Now this is a real problem, because Shatner's appearance on a given episode is often a highlight of that episode. There's not a single line of dialogue acknowledging that he's no longer present, but it's comically obvious in certain scenes. In one episode, somebody literally bombs the Cosmos offices, and Bascom, who owns and runs the Cosmos offices, never shows up to survey the damage or check if his employees are okay. When Sid, one of Bascom's best men, dies, all of his friends and colleagues are there to toast him, but Bascom just isn't there.
He never really liked long, sad speeches. He figured you should be able to sum up a person in just 4 words.
Sort of like haiku, but shorter.
Nope, that's actually something completely different. I think it's pretty obvious that Shatner was off, signing posters for the 15th Star Trek movie or something, but it just leaves this very obvious rift for 3/4 of the show's runtime. How are you going to have a police show without the hard-ass boss scolding Jake for his insolence while also giving him fatherly advice when he needs it?
You trust me that much?
Like a son.
Why? You've known him for 3 episodes. For the most part, the entertaining episodes are those that dive headfirst into the speculative fiction of TekWar. In the episode Killer Instinct, there's a new virtual reality game called Destruction where cops and criminals face off against each other. Many of the teenagers who play a pirated copy of Destruction develop violent tendencies, resulting in the murder of a police officer. The parents of the boy who pulled the trigger blame the video game, saying it brainwashed their son.
He sold it? Why shouldn't he bear the blame?
Because your kid pulled the trigger. Can you believe that, man? What happened to the notion of personal responsibility?
Hey, that's a good point, but Jake and Sid don't agree and figure video games must cause violence. Danny, who's been replaced with a new actor named Christian Campbell, helps his dad investigate the game, only to find himself going berserk.
It was just a game, you know?
Yeah, well, please,
Jake and Sid discover that pirated copies of Destruction have been spiked with a computer virus that causes violent thinking in players. Though VR was by no means an unexplored concept in sci-fi at this point, it's still fun to see what the writers thought the future of video games might look like, and it's not totally off base, mind you. The game scenes are also a little more visually interesting, with some unnatural lighting, a set that does look suitably deathmatch oriented, and some textbook Dutch tilts to enhance the disorientation. Danny 2 also does a much better job than Danny 1 in my opinion, and is far more believable when he's playing off Jake.
Sorry, old Danny, I don't have time for you. I've got a better son now.
I just don't really know what the VR episode is getting at. It seems like it's always on the precipice of saying something about violence in games or software piracy, but it never really develops into any kind of coherent point. I don't know what it is about police procedural writers that gives them the confidence to take on subjects they don't know anything about. Some episodes manage to keep on track a little bit more. In the episode Deep Cover, Sam agrees to undergo an experimental technique called mind sculpting. This allows her to develop a second personality layered over top of the original. Since mind probes are ubiquitous in the future, mind sculpting allows Sam to create an authentic, loyal persona as a foot soldier for a local mafia baroness without anyone getting wise. As she digs deeper into the organization and develops a real, meaningful relationship with her boss, snapping back to reality becomes more complicated. You can tell when it's evil Sam because she wears leather. When women do it, it's evil. The concept of somebody digging too deep into undercover work and losing a grip on who they are is nothing new in police-themed TV. But I like that the plot is technologically charged here. The concept of extremely accurate and instant lie detectors, enough so that results are admissible in court, would fundamentally change the nature of both police work and criminal activity. It's interesting to see how technology is used to circumvent this, keeping the wheels of industry turning. Winger is far more prevalent in the series than he was in the movies, acting as Jake's rival. Since Winger is an actual officer of the law, Jake is often forced to step on his toes or go behind his back in order to perform his investigations. Winger has a quiet respect for Jake, but also distrusts him because of the allegations against him. Maurice Dean Wint, who plays Lieutenant Winger, does a really good job with the role. I have to admit, I was a bit disappointed when I found out the most visually striking character was just not going to be some guy with a huge forehead. In spite of that, Winger ends up being one of the best characters in TekWar. It sounds counterproductive since, as an android, he's been stripped of emotion, but there's a lot of charm in Wint's performance.
The magistrate's judgment. He's greatly impaired.
His mechanical exasperation at Jake's bad jokes and endless sarcasm is always good for a laugh.
The Thornton Act outlawed the production of new androids and of replacement CRUs.
Can't sneak this one by in your expense report, can you, Winger?
Sometimes Winger himself will attempt to make a crack at Jake's expense. He has a tick where his mouth reflexively moves in the motion of a smile before quickly abandoning it, as if he's remembering that he can't process humor.
When we locate Krebs.
TekCredits says you never will.
No, Cardigan. You know gambling is against the law.
It's little nuances like this that provide some screen presence to a character that would have been pretty tough to play well. For a local Toronto actor without many roles under his belt, I would say he punches above his weight. That's why episode 9, titled Deadline, is undoubtedly the peak of TekWar's televised run. Winger is assaulted in an alleyway, and a critical biochip in his android brain is stolen. This gives him less than 24 hours before he starts undergoing neural degradation, which would cause him to go berserk and ultimately die. In TekWar's future, however, androids are not looked at favorably. There's a mistrust among most people towards Andes, as they were originally built only for the dirty work, but now take more advanced jobs from humans.
And without a soul, these mechanical puppets have no place in a just, moral, human world.
Because of this, Winger can't go to the department, as they would likely have him decommissioned and disassembled without a second thought. With no one to turn to, Winger reluctantly goes to Jake for help.
How much time before you...
No more than 18 hours.
You got a problem.
Among other things, this episode acts as a deep dive into the life of TekWar's androids. Despite not being allowed to convey emotion, Winger demonstrates a real sense of vulnerability here, bearing his soul to Jake, if it can even be called a soul.
I was one of the first public service androids. I do what I'm programmed to do, and I do it well. Is it right that I be allowed to deteriorate and cease functioning?
Now look, this episode is still heavily burdened by the same low-budget 90s era hokiness as the rest of the series. The androids look ridiculous. Winger, your girlfriend, woof. But considering the circumstances, this episode stands well ahead of the pack. It features an interesting concept, the development of feelings and dreams where such things were never accounted for. At what point can the creation of a machine for the purpose of work and with the end game of disposal be considered anything less than slavery and abuse?
You have the right to an attorney. You have the right to a fair trial. You have the right to own property. You have the right not to be property. I have read you your rights. Do you understand them?
Yes, I understand.
No! You do not.
These themes are explored nicely thanks to some engaging interactions between likable characters. It almost makes you wish that Winger was Jake's partner. There's urgency and tension created by the ticking time bomb that is Winger, but the episode still takes time to give us these little slices of life in greater Los Angeles. Despite the concept being partially cribbed from Blade Runner, obviously, this is legitimately good TV. Not outstanding nor groundbreaking, but a true showcase of TekWar's potential.
What has my life meant? Will it matter that I ever existed?
Deadline marks the midpoint of the series, and unfortunately, it's mostly downhill from here. As mentioned, Shatner's absence robs the series of much of its heart. The supporting cast just isn't up to the task. Bascom has an assistant named Nika who's supposed to be the resident whiz kid and techie. It's an unfortunate name for some reasons that become obvious when you watch the show.
Talk fast, Nika.
Okay, let's slow down and enunciate from now on, Jake. The rebellious culture surrounding hacking and the buzz around the World Wide Web were at their apex when TekWar was airing. The burgeoning world of internet could have very easily been TekWar's frontier, where it sets itself apart. Instead, TekWar's internet, which takes up a lot of airtime, is relegated to scenes where people sit around and talk about how great the internet is while screensavers play in the foreground. Another opportunity to showcase the big changes that would be coming down the digital pike wasted. Amidst everything, TekWar languishes in its struggle to find identity. When it's at its best, it's like a low-budget Deus Ex TV series as imagined by people who never played Deus Ex. It's dumb fun, but also smart just often enough to give you something to chew on. At its worst, it's TekWar. It's mired in cliches. Boom mics keep floating into the fucking frame. It's not that hard, guys. Just keep an eye on it. It's patched together with ADR. Its action scenes are very bad. Okay, that might be a point in the show's favor. That is kind of funny. And it's rife with flubbed line deliveries that only serve to remind you of how little the production had to work with.
If I fire...
It's also never a good sign when you're not even one full season in and you're already relying on amnesia arcs for the main character. What can I say that hasn't already been said? The show has a lot of problems. It had some potential, but it just couldn't manifest an identity before viewers became disinterested. Between Deep Space Nine, Babylon 5, Bible Man, and The X-Files, sci-fi TV fans in the mid-90s were spoiled for choice. The thing is, Cyberpunk was relatively unexplored territory for network TV, so TekWar could have offered a fresh angle as a more digestible Blade Runner. If one were to compile its absolute best episodes as a proof of concept, it would have been easy to see the potential, but that creativity just wasn't nearly consistent enough to transcend the show beyond its dismal budget. The show was given poor to middling reviews. It was cancelled before the final few episodes even had a chance to air, and it was largely relegated to the dustbin of 90s TV history. Of course, many people do know about this series. The name TekWar means something to them, despite the fact that they have no experience with the books, the movies, or the show. In fact, many people familiar with TekWar didn't even know it existed in these mediums. These people know of the series for one reason and one reason only: the TekWar video game. The TekWar game was conceived when a branch of publisher Intracorp called Capstone Software was asked by Universal to produce a game based on the television series.
And when we researched that, we found that Intracorp was the best company to handle the TekWar game.
Far be it from me to call bullshit, but I don't think that's true. I think Capstone was chosen because they agreed to produce it on the cheap, but that's just my guess. Capstone did not have much of a reputation in the gaming world. What they were known for, if anything, was publishing notoriously bad licensed games for MS-DOS. Wayne's World, Home Alone, The Beverly Hillbillies, Homie the Clown, like the In Living Color sketch.
Let's get something straight, kids! Homie may be a clown, but he don't make a fool out of himself.
Who are these games for?
Homie don't play that.
With that in mind, I suppose it was fate that Capstone and TekWar would eventually find each other. This dark union produced a game which would go down in infamy and is often cited as one of the crummiest first-person shooters ever made. With all of that said, let's take a look at TekWar with an open mind, see where it fails, and find out if perhaps it has any redeeming qualities. The game opens up with the intro from the television series, but very, very compressed.
And prepare to witness the technology of the future today in TekWar, the game of CD-ROM.
I am prepared to bear witness, Bill. When the game begins, we're gonna need a bigger Pentium. The game opens up just like the show, with Jake being taken out of cryostasis, and once again, we're in space. Just pick a damn time period, 2044, 2120. In the comic books, it's 2092 and then 2020 a few issues later. One of the authors wrote, "We're gonna level with you. We don't know when it takes place, but, quote, for now, let's all sit back and enjoy the continuing adventures of Jake Cardigan. Don't patronize me." The game features William Shatner giving you directives, and I love that they chroma keyed him over top of the TekWar logo instead of, I don't know, Bascom's Detective Agency or any vaguely futuristic setting. It's like he transcends physical space and only exists in TekWar. We've got a big problem on our hands. A group of cyber villains are conspiring to send tech through the Matrix, creating a generation of digital addicts. We need to enter the Matrix to stop this from happening, but to do so, we need 7 Matrix keys from 7 tech lords. You can choose which target to pursue in a level select screen that defies expectation. Wait a minute, Marty Dollar, the iPod guy? Why is he a tech lord now? All of the tech lords are based on characters from the TV show, making this at least a half-assed attempt to follow the source material, I guess? Sonny Hokori's erstwhile death by electrocution notwithstanding. So you pick a target and the game begins. It's a first-person shooter, but it's so much more than that. Your gun is holstered by default and you're surrounded by non-hostile NPCs. Seems like a good chance to explore. Normal things are happening in TekWar right now. Ah yes, the Blade Runner to TJ Hooker to Lynchian Nightmare pipeline is in full effect, I see. Oh, what now? Why is the security guard trying to kill me? You saw, it was self-defense. Within each level, Jake, at least I'm pretty sure he's Jake, explores the environment, fights enemies, and finds key cards which are used to hunt down and dispatch the area's tech lord. Pretty standard stuff for a first-person shooter, but Capstone wouldn't have been content with the bare minimum, so they decided to not even do it. Instead, blazing their own trail, shaking things up with their reimagining of the formula. Before digging into the details, let's get a picture of what the FPS landscape looked like at this point. While there had been a few other first-person shooters leading up to it, the release of id Software's Doom in 1993 and its subsequent popularity created a veritable gold rush among developers looking to replicate its success. As such, the phrase first-person shooter wouldn't really enter the gaming lexicon until years later. Instead, most people referred to these games as Doom clones. Most games followed Doom's formula without much deviation. This wasn't just a creative decision, it was also one born of limitations. There just wasn't much the average programmer could cook up beyond a maze-like environment full of monsters. Objects like keycards and switches to open doors added an element of puzzle solving and exploration, but without great level design, this formula would become stale quickly. This is what made the build engine such a big deal. While id was working on the Quake engine, which would act as the next major iteration in 3D gaming tech, a programmer by the name of Ken Silverman was working on an engine of his own. This engine, called Build, would go on to power some of the absolute greatest games of the 1990s. It was something of an intermediary step between the 2.5D graphics of Doom and the 3D of Quake. Notably, the engine focused much more on interactivity than either of these games. That, and its ability to render environments which were much more geometrically complex than Doom, gave projects made in the Build engine a reputation as having some of the most inventive level design in the industry. To this day, games made on this engine, like Blood, are just a delight to play, not only because of how wildly creative each level can be, but because of how smooth the movement and gunplay is. Quake may have outclassed games like Duke in terms of raw visual fidelity, but the latter game's levels are just a pleasure to explore over and over again. I think it's safe to say that the Build engine games are some of the all-time genre classics. Except for all the ones that sucked. When talking about the Build engine, discussion typically centers around a few different games: Duke 3D, Blood, Shadow Warrior, and more recently, Ion Fury. Underneath those, you'll sometimes hear tell of the less beloved Build games, stuff like Redneck Rampage or Power Slave, the original version that is, not the vastly superior Saturn version. Finally, with a substantial power gap, you get all of the other shit. Extreme Paint Brawl, Nom, WW2, GI, and would you believe it, William Shatner's TekWar. Capstone Software has the distinction of being the first developer to actually use the build engine for a commercial product. Well, legally anyway, but that's another story. 2 games from Capstone, Witchhaven and TekWar, were released at almost the exact same time, and both games used early versions of Ken Silverman's build engine. I find this all worth mentioning because it gives us some insight, not only into why TekWar does things so differently, but why Capstone felt the need to do things differently at all. When making levels and designing the basic gameplay, having an episodic structure like Doom was the obvious choice. Instead, after choosing a tech lord to pursue, you begin each level at a subway station. You can see the different explorable areas on this beautifully designed subway map, which uses the Microsoft system typeface to glorious effect. Wait a minute, the texture isn't even mapped to the wall. Well, maybe it's a hologram. This is, after all, the year 2020 to 2120 or somewhere thereabouts. You actually have to board the tram and wait for your stop. Perhaps not all that impressive in retrospect given what sorts of train levels the build engine would prove to be capable of, but it would have been pretty novel at the time. When you get off at any of the stops, there's a unique chunk of city that you can explore, complete with pedestrians walking around and enterable buildings. Now, much like the books, and the movies, and the show, I can't rightly say how much influence, if any, William Shatner actually had on this game. It is, of course, credited to him in a big way, but as we know, that doesn't mean anything. Call me naive, but I do get the sense that Shatner had some involvement beyond the FMV cutscenes. Doofus episodes about violence in video games notwithstanding, Shatner has spoken in interviews about his positive views on gaming as a medium. He claims to have played games like Doom and Myst leading up to the development of TekWar. Yeah, those certainly aren't deep cuts, but Shatner was already a senior citizen by this point. By the time video games were even in their infancy, he was a grown man with children. Rather than shunning this burgeoning medium like so many olds of his time, he seemed to embrace the possibility of games as entertainment. In an interview with Computer Gaming World, he predicts that computers will shoulder the future of media and entertainment, with large Hollywood productions relying less on traditional artists and more on programmers. I suppose you could say the writing was on the wall by '95, but I think there's still some prescience in this statement. If nothing else, all of his positive talk about games as an artistic medium showed a level of open-mindedness that you might not expect from somebody whose heyday was the 1960s. With all of this in mind, I don't think it's totally off base to imagine Shatner dictating his vision for the TekWar game to Capstone and then turning them loose. Chiefly, what makes TekWar an oddball game for its time is the fact that you're not encouraged to kill everything that moves. That would have been weird. If you complete a level with too many casualties under your belt, Bascom will scold Jake and tell him that he'll be sent back to the freezer if he keeps fucking things up.
You may have taken down DeMarco, but you also got a lot of innocent civilians hurt in the process. You know, the ones you're supposed to protect? I can't keep the law off your back if this happens again.
If you manage to complete a level without harming anyone, Shatner will pat you on the back and tell you that you've done a great job.
With Marty Dollar out of the way, we're one step closer to solving this whole case. And you even managed to bring him in without getting anyone killed. Keep this up, and I may be able to keep you out of the freezer.
The only problem is that this is nearly impossible. The moment you step out into the first open environment, the chaos and madness of TekWar will be plain to see. This is the future. This is hell. You are serenaded by the screams of the damned and will soon find yourself among them. Enemies can appear anywhere in TekWar. They'll be skulking around a Tech Lord's base of operations, or they can be working as a cashier inside of a store. You don't know who's going to pull a gun and start shooting at you, but they're programmed to once you've entered their range of AI, so to speak. There are also kamikaze bots in the game, much like the movie, but less funny. The idea, I think, was to make you paranoid. You don't know who's going to start shooting, you don't know who's going to explode. Capstone simply did not have the resources nor expertise to pull this idea off with any sort of aplomb. What typically happens is that you enter a new area and then you just hear a non-stop barrage of gunshots and screams. Sometimes you can see where it's coming from, other times it's happening inside of a nearby building. Kind of makes it seem like Jake is suffering from cryogenically induced PTSD nightmares. If you pull a gun, nearby cops or security guards will tell you to disarm yourself, give you a few seconds before they start firing.
Drop the gun!
This is actually kind of a cool touch, makes the world feel a little bit alive. The issue is that you can't defend yourself without the cops becoming angry. If you shoot for any reason, even if an enemy shoots you first, the police will register you as the aggressor and try to kill you. This begins a domino effect where you have to try to avoid killing innocents, the cops get angry and shoot at you, you're forced to return fire, a bunch of NPCs end up getting killed in the crossfire, and Bascom chews you out.
You may have gotten Sonny off the streets, but did you have to take half of LA with him?
Yup. Further problems include the fact that your kill count actually seems to include enemies. You can't kill anybody without Bascom getting angry. You have an arsenal of pretty dinky FPS guns, with the exception of the flamethrower. I guess that one's kinda cool. It's no flare gun. But you're encouraged to stick with the prod. It's a stun gun actually, and while it sort of blows, it has infinite ammo, and it's considered non-lethal. So if you're trying to make the Shat smile, there's no reason to have any gun equipped other than this one. The other big issue is that NPCs are desperate to die. They will scream in fear of you while running towards you. They stand in the line of fire so regularly that it almost seems intentional. That wasn't even me, that was a cop across the street. But it'll be counted towards my lethality.
Don't be so proud of yourself.
Sometimes people will just be killed by ambient environmental objects. In one level, there's a Capstone branded, I'll say garbage truck because that makes for richer symbolism, driving around. It just runs civilians over and nobody seems to care. This place is a madhouse. It's nearly impossible to play like a pacifist unless you're speedrunning the levels and deliberately keeping your weapons holstered. However, there's also not much reason to do that, aside from hearing more Shatner dialogue.
I don't like having to wash the blood of innocents off my hands.
You can practically see the teleprompter behind the camera. While Bascom keeps warning you and telling you that he can't keep the cops off your back anymore, nothing bad actually happens if you play the game lethally, so stick with your pistol, I say. It does a perfectly adequate job of killing everybody, and ammo is plentiful. That is until you transition to a new area, at which point all of your guns and ammo inexplicably disappear, like a pistol start in Doom. You move between areas a lot in this game, so this is a pretty boneheaded oversight. The controls can be troublesome. To be fair, you can actually rebind most of the keys, but there's a limit to TekWar's generosity. Like most early FPS games, you're encouraged to mainly stick with the keyboard or the mouse. Horizontal mouse look works fine, but moving the mouse vertically actually causes your character to go forwards or backwards, a la Wolfenstein 3D. With modern control schemes in mind, that mouse movement wasn't ideal in Wolfenstein, but it worked because there was no vertical mouse look in that game. One of the build engine's great improvements was giving the player the ability to look up and down, and TekWar does take advantage of that fact. This means that whenever there's an enemy on another plane, you have to stop moving and use the keyboard to manually look up and down. It's very unintuitive. Games like Doom would have enemies along that Z-axis, but the game used auto-aim to compensate for your ability to look up and down. No such luck in TekWar. They've also made the avant-garde design decision of having the weapon swap keys not actually swap to your weapon. You have to press the right key, that'll holster your current weapon, then you have to press the draw weapon button to bring the selected gun up. The game doesn't actually tell you which weapon you've swapped to, so the only way of knowing is to keep tabs on your ammo count. There's also a C count, which was reportedly supposed to represent Jake's consciousness level. Whatever that mechanic was, it was scrapped before the game was finished, but they left the bar in. I don't know, makes everything look a little bit deeper and more complex, I guess. Speaking of which, there's an item called the AccuTrack, which literally doesn't do anything. TekWar is a proverbial graveyard of abandoned dreams and ideas. I will say to the game's credit that there are a lot of interesting ideas here. The game levels are varied and surprisingly naturalistic. What I mean by that is, instead of being purpose-built as video game levels with no thought to realism or immersion, TekWar prioritizes realistic urban environments. So, when you enter a city area, there's a skyline of buildings with neon advertisements flashing. A lot of these buildings are fully explorable, even when they don't have anything to do with the mission. You can take elevators to different floors, traipse across rooftops, and shoot out windows to gain access to fire escapes and whatnot. The buildings have offices, bathrooms, ventilation systems, There are city parks and ponds and construction zones with cracked pavement that you can actually dig around in. The environments themselves are totally non-linear, which gives you a lot of freedom to approach these areas from different directions too. This is a pretty inventive approach for a game from this time period. Strictly from a functional design standpoint, TekWar's cities are pretty convincing. There are a lot of assets that are only used in one place just to create some unique corners of the world to come across. This is a far cry from, say, Doom 2, which is the first FPS I can think of that used realistic urban environments as levels. There are also quite a few of them here. As I mentioned, there's typically 2 or 3 different zones you can explore for each target, so relatively speaking, there's a lot to see. That said, there's probably a reason that non-linear lifelike environments were not pursued very often. It takes a very creative and talented level designer to make something realistic and fun at the same time. TekWar's environments, relative to other games at the time, certainly are realistic, but the fun part is where the game suffers. It's where the player suffers. First of all, there's just the pacing of these levels. Deus Ex this is not. You can approach areas from different points of entry, but the layout of the enemies and weapons is senseless. That's too bad, because quality enemy placement and deliberately paced levels are the hallmarks of great retro FPS games. But the enemy placement here is so bad that it feels random at times. Like I said, you just don't know who's going to start shooting, so you'll have rooms or even outdoor environments stuffed with enemies and civilians. Anytime TekWar feels good to play, it's an accident and it's a fleeting sensation. The weapon variety is pretty lousy to begin with, but the lack of enemy variety is just criminal. Everyone is just a person. There's nothing particularly interesting, and this was a challenge for games aiming for realism in these early FPS engines. I mean, take any of the big 3 build engine games. Their settings were all fantastical enough to allow for a large variety of enemies, and that's the key. A perfectly designed variety of enemies is precisely why Doom, despite being the granddaddy of the FPS genre, is still fun as hell and so easy to pick up and play today. Every enemy has a defined role and a reason to exist, they all buttress each other and are used to create specific challenges. In TekWar it's just shoot the guy, shoot the guy, shoot the guy, and it's very uninteresting. The only enemies that do anything other than stand there shooting at you with no personality are kamikaze androids, holograms of the local tech lord, you can tell cause was a hologram, and rats which move erratically and have to be killed by manually aiming down and shooting. It's just a terrible variety. The sewer level that the rats inhabit may be the single most frustrating in TekWar. It may be that. It may not be. I'm foreshadowing that it gets worse, but this is pretty bad. A lot of the level is just hallways, which are then mirrored to double the size of the sewer, making this whole thing repetitive, confusing, and just utterly dull to look at. Why is a major stop on this transit line a sewer anyway? You may think the sonic environment of TekWar can't get any worse than the endless screams I showed you earlier, but I think the sewer probably takes the cake. I don't even understand how it's possible to make something sound this bad. Just have a looping sound effect propagate from the water. Instead, they make water a one-off sound that can trigger for any reason, which means it overlaps to the point where your speakers are just blown out. I spent a lot of time here, fruitlessly I might add. I can't even tell you how much I need Shatner to praise me at this point. He's been giving me nothing but negative reinforcement over the course of the entire game.
Far be it from me to judge my fellow man, but the last time I checked, killing was a bad thing.
I need him to pat me on the back. I need him to have a catch with me. The goal of any level is to find the red keycard and the blue keycard. Once you have them, you can gain access to the boss's lair and take care of the tech lord. You aren't given much by way of direction, but honestly, as long as you're thorough, it's not hard to find what you're looking for. TekWar certainly seems like the kind of game that would hide critical key items behind invisible walls and trap doors, but thankfully, the number of secrets in this game is limited. This usually isn't a good thing for classic FPS games, but it is good for TekWar. Another interesting thing is that you're actually given multiple ways of acquiring keycards. You can either find them in preset locations by exploring the level, or you can hunt down an enemy who will drop that same card. This, combined with the open-ended environments and the player being able to choose their target, gives William Shatner's Cruelty Squad a degree of non-linearity that wouldn't have been common. Unfortunately, this also means that actually finding the keycards is mostly a matter of blind luck. You just have to walk around everywhere, opening every door, looking behind every couch, and shooting every enemy, hoping for the best. There's a headache-inducing pattern of nonsense that you have to become accustomed to if you actually plan on getting through this game, and sometimes, even learning to embrace it isn't enough. Speaking of headache-inducing, I suppose I should acknowledge the game's visual design. It's all over the place, and few of those places are good. I will say there are more geometric objects than you might expect, things like revolving doors, gas pumps, vehicles driving around, and awkwardly snapping to new positions when they're turning because the planes they're comprised of have to be redrawn. There's a boat driving around at the beach. That's kind of fun, that's kind of zany, you can even go for a cruise. The visual design of some areas also have a certain amount of care put into them, like water leaking through the cracked ceilings of abandoned subway stations or graffiti being sprayed all over a building downtown. I have to say, there are some segments of the game that would be reasonably atmospheric if the rest of the game didn't undercut that at every turn. TekWar's biggest problem is that its visual design is just not held together by any common thread. Obviously, the people are digitized actors. I have many problems with the game, but this isn't one of them. I love corny, digitized graphics in mid-90s CD-based games. I've made several videos on the subject at this point. I recognize for all intents and purposes that it looks bad, but to me, it's a glorious time capsule. Beyond simply striving for realism, it's a style that can't really be recreated in a modern way, and indie devs don't seem all that interested in recapturing it, so it's just brutally of its time, and I take a shine to that style for this reason. TekWar's bigger problems are its texture work and its lighting. Now, the build engine was capable of some really impressive lighting. As a matter of fact, it's used to great effect in games like Duke 3D to not only enhance the moodiness of certain levels, but affect the gameplay as well. Using lighting, you can differentiate rooms and draw the character's eyes to critical points of interest. The lighting in TekWar serves to do nothing other than bring out all of the garish detail in the game's assets, and it's hideous. The textures are stretched and manipulated in ways that render them unrecognizable at times, and so busy that you start developing eye strain at others. With a Cyberpunk game, there's many an opportunity to fill the environment with bright fluorescent colors, but TekWar is oddly attached to its browns, grays, and whites. I can't believe I'm saying this, but they probably should have used the TV show as a visual reference. The mapping is also awful, with textures just abruptly being cut off and repeating in ways that one may generously describe as amateurish. Well, I did already say hideous, so I guess there's no point in playing coy now. Star Wars Dark Forces released the same year as TekWar, and it's a great example of a game aiming for a similar style of futurism on a similar game engine that just looks way better. The texture work is cleaner, almost every panel and sprite looks like pixel art, the details never mar the clarity of the image. Perhaps most importantly, colors and lighting are used to guide the player's attention across the game levels, and they make each room or hallway feel unique while still being bound by a unified style. TekWar, in comparison, is just thoughtless. Ceilings, walls, and floors look like rasterized photographs that were slapped together rather than elements that were carefully designed. If you stop and look, there's almost not a single frame in TekWar that doesn't have something wrong with it. At its best, you can appreciate how ambitious some of these levels were for their time, but for the most part, it's just a mess of visual and auditory incoherence, where you have no idea what's happening, where to go, or why you're taking damage. Now, take every complaint I've made about TekWar, the bad controls, the poor shooting mechanics, the garbled visual style, the ear-splitting audio, the poor level design, the aimless wandering, what have you. Take all of those complaints and multiply them by 684,000, and you have what TekWar refers to as the Matrix. Once you've defeated the 7 Tech Lords, you are allowed to enter the Matrix, TekWar's final challenge, at an FPS level so unbelievably bad that I struggle to avoid the trappings of the angry reviewer. It's
a piece of shit, and I don't like it.
Yeah, exactly. The Matrix represents internet as seen in TekWar. It takes place from the same first-person perspective, but with a few zesty lemon twists. First of all, no more guns. Now you only have access to your internet glove, which shoots internet balls. The game also fully embraces the Z-axis, allowing you to use your jump and crouch buttons to move up and down freely. In order to complete the Matrix and defeat Internet, you must complete 7 separate zones, decrypting the Tech Lord's key codes and finding the location of the Tech Mastermind. For the first time in this channel's history, there is a game so holistically awful that I am struggling to approach an explanation of it, but I'll try. And if you're photosensitive, I'm begging you, please either listen to this as audio or skip to the next chapter of the video. I can't even imagine what this is going to do to you. First of all, there's the visual design. The Matrix is unhinged, but it's also malicious. Repeating psychedelic patterns are deliberately used to disorient you to make you unsure of what's a traversable space and what's an invisible wall, and there are plenty of those. This is especially bad in the sections with wireframe graphics, which make System Shock 2's ending section look like the silent cartographer in terms of quality. This entire area is a violent assault on the senses, and nowhere is that clearer than with the flashing lights. It is horrid. They couldn't help themselves. Every section of the Matrix is subject to this aggressive strobe light that you just have to shield your eyes from. The whole thing is a kaleidoscopic nightmare that reads like some sort of MK Ultra trigger. I'll take the high road here and say there are occasionally some cool ideas. The way certain concepts are visualized, such as the areas infected with a virus being covered in diseased biomass or literal firewalls preventing you from moving forward, are kinda clever and show that this section wasn't just an asset flip. There are moments where I can see what they were going for, but that's about as charitable as I can get here. Even if the graphics weren't so hard on the eyes, the gameplay here is just dreadful. Unlike the rest of the game, which gives you several different ways of moving forward, in the Matrix you have to unlock doors in a sequential order. Each of the 7 different levels is a labyrinth, a hopelessly confusing, trap-laden labyrinth, where your goal is to find a switch which unlocks the door to a switch which unlocks the door to probably another switch which unlocks the door, please God be the final switch, and then you finally get to your goal. In between these switches are teleporters which take you all around the local area, and sometimes an entirely new one. If you accidentally take the wrong teleporter, the wireframe surrounding it locks you out, forcing you to restart the previous area from scratch, which means you have to go through all of the other areas to start again. So I say, just start a new game, you're screwed. These maps aren't designed to provide a fair challenge, they're designed to confuse and annoy you. Hey, this one's kind of funny actually. The graphics are already messy, but it's made worse by the fact that you pretty much have to have your auto map open at all times in the Matrix. Otherwise, it's just too easy to get turned around and lose track of where you are or where you've been. There were multiple occasions where I was so disoriented that I just had to restart the level over. Thankfully, when you hit New Game, your progress as far as which areas you've completed is saved, a merciful oversight on the part of the developers. Because of the new vertical focus, enemies now float all around you, above, below, in front, behind. You can't hit them from just anywhere, but they can sure hit you. You have to bob and weave all around these large rooms, very slowly moving up and down, looking for the source of the damage you're receiving, before awkwardly, manually aiming and taking them out. Sometimes the enemies are invisible, because there's just no ceiling on the awfulness of the Matrix. It all makes this by far the hardest area in the game, not only in terms of navigating and solving puzzles, but just staying alive. Much of the time you'll be so desperate for ammo or health that you'll just cruise past enemies, hoping their hit scan projectiles don't give you a game over in between saves. The worst part is that even after spending an eternity unlocking a key, it's only one of 7. There are 7 levels in the Matrix, and each one is uniquely bad. As far as single, one-off segments go, this is the worst thing I've ever seen in a video game, and I don't think it'll be topped. I've reviewed the Zelda CDI games, Night Trap, Virtual Hide Glide. I'm usually out there giving games like this the benefit of the doubt. From Omakase Savers to Tracy Scoggins' Snow Job, I have never experienced something as exhausting as The Matrix in William Shatner's TekWar. A studio that had been making games for over a decade at this point shipped this. Finally, after ample frustration and with a headache, and I'm not being cheeky, I really got a headache from playing this, I find the last key.
So far you've been lucky and you've taken down all the tech lords, but nothing counts if the Tech Matrix broadcast node goes online. If that broadcast unit goes online, hundreds of thousands of lives will be affected, and all that we've worked for will be lost. Find it and destroy it.
There's another level! This is my hole, and I'm not leaving. So the last level, it's not actually all that bad. In fact, compared to the Matrix, it's like a victory lap. But it's the principle of the thing. The idea of having another level after all of this is just sadistic, man. The final Tech Lord is killed, and the Tech War is Tech won, but for how Tech long?
There are still lots of other tech lords throughout the world that need to be put away, and we're the ones to do it.
We're a fucking private detective agency based in Los Angeles. Why do we have jurisdiction to travel internationally and kill people?
We've made a pretty good team.
Shut up, old man. Tech War is bad, but it's bad in a special sort of way. It's the kind of bad you only get when a group of developers who don't have the necessary resources decide to break genre rules and pursue their ambitious, untested design compulsions. That's a gambit. It either ends up smashingly well or very, very poorly. On some level, I do have to respect what Capstone was trying to do here. The concept of an FPS where you're encouraged to avoid violence where possible, where you're given large open environments to explore rather than tailored levels, and where you have some control over the path your character follows to the endpoint, none of this is inherently bad. In fact, it can be said that these elements, in a vacuum, are part of what make immersive sim games so great. But I would stop well short of calling Tech War a stepping stone to the modern immersive sim. It just doesn't do anything right enough to have realistically acted as a muse. But what do I know? Maybe some developer who worked on Vampire Bloodlines grew up on Tech War. Maybe it's the only reason they got into the industry. Stranger things have happened, I suppose. Regardless, it's a good thing that Tech War got made and that it's Capstone who made it. If it was merely a competent FPS built on the Doom engine, you and I probably wouldn't be talking about it right now. Instead, it was a bold new idea powered by bold new technology, which was executed very poorly. And you know what? That's funny. If Tech War as a franchise has taught me anything, it's that funny is better than boring. Bear in mind, this was back in the day when a company could produce a shitty game or two without the entire studio being liquidated and its developers fired on Christmas Eve. In spite of the works produced by Capstone, I do think there's something wonderful about that. I can't rightly say that the world is a better place for the existence of Witchhaven 2 Blood Vengeance, but I yearn for an industry where a publisher can look at a pitch for such a game and say, the first game did really badly, but yeah, sure, you guys can have another chance. I guess that's the overarching feeling I have going through the Tech War franchise omnibus. There was a time when it was okay for things to just be okay, when you could at least give a fledgling property a fighting chance to find an audience and a voice. Now, if you don't come out gangbusters, your game, your movie, or your show is summarily executed and its body is buried in a digital graveyard somewhere. David Lynch spent $40 million of producer Dino De Laurentiis' money making his 1984 film adaptation of Dune, and it was a critical and commercial bomb. David Lynch then had the nerve to ask De Laurentiis for more money to make another movie. And you know what he said? He said, "Okay, David." And then David Lynch made fucking Blue Velvet. Artists and craftspeople only get better when they have chances to improve. When the environment for that becomes unsustainable, everybody loses, including the people with the money. Now, Capstone didn't produce Blue Velvet, they produced Witchhaven 2, but hey, you don't know until you try. I guess what I'm trying to say is, we need more tech wars in this world. We don't want them, but I think we need them. Maybe not the Matrix part. I opened up this video with a question. How can such an expansive multimedia franchise have zero cultural impact? That was a little hyperbolic. Tech War was worth a Simpsons gag at least, and I mean, 500,000 books sold, highest rated TV premiere in basic cable history, 2 different comic book series. Tech War had its moment in the sun, there's no doubt. There was just no reason to carry it with us into the future, and that's why it seems to have never been relevant. Perhaps ironically, in light of Tech War's focus on the net, it was the product of a time when collective cultural experiences were shared offline. Now that we're plugged in, such experiences can seem like artifacts we're unearthing rather than yesterday's record-breaking televised entertainment. Not every work needs a subreddit or Discord server devoted to its worship in order to have justified its existence. The video game has certainly had the longest cultural lifespan, and it's easy to see why. Video games are often associated with younger generations, more online, more connected, more apt to share their interests, such as weird FPS games with gaudy, digitized graphics. A curiosity from a different time in gaming history, TekWar the video game endures, almost exclusively as the butt of jokes, but remembered nonetheless. The books, the movies, and the TV series haven't exactly stuck in the cultural consciousness. Even in William Shatner's autobiography, which covers the breadth of his career, he barely mentions TekWar. Outside of the game, the franchise straddles that line of forgettability, just competent enough to not be entertainingly awful, but not quite good enough to be memorable. There are flashes of something greater throughout. If the show had like twice the budget, maybe another season, I could see it becoming a cult thing. No less cheesy perhaps, but with a bit more breathing room for some vision and creativity to manifest. Universal and William Shatner pushed hard for TekWar to be the next big thing, but sometimes it just isn't meant to be. The 90s was an amazing decade for cyberpunk-inspired media, and TekWar just couldn't keep pace with the zeitgeist. If Shatner's ambitions for the property stopped at being a novel you'd read at an airport and then throw away, by that metric, it's hard to say that TekWar wasn't a success. It may not have been great, it may not have been influential, but it was TekWar, and you can never take that away from it.
Marty Dollar's out of the way, but couldn't you have been more careful? The body count keeps rising, and it's harder and harder to justify it. We're not the killers. They are. Try to remember that. You may have taken down DeMarco, but you also got a lot of innocent civilians hurt in the process. You know, the ones you're supposed to protect? I can't keep the law off your back if this happens again. Don't be so proud of yourself. Sure, you brought down Rossi, but you made the People's Park sector look like a war zone. Next time, use better judgment if and when you apply lethal force. Bringing in Conrad Lowell was great, but unless you want to join him, you can't keep leaving a trail of bodies behind. You need to watch where you shoot. I can't keep the cops from throwing you back in the freezer if you keep screwing up and getting innocent bystanders killed. Be more careful out there. You may have gotten Sonny off the streets, but did you have to take half of LA with him? Far be it for me to judge my fellow man, but the last time I checked, killing was a bad thing. This may be war, but the ends still don't justify the means. I don't like having to wash the blood of innocents off my hands. Don't make me do it again. With Connor out of the picture, we have a better idea of what's going on. But you have got to watch that itchy trigger finger of yours. If you keep getting people killed, it's back to the deep freeze for you.